Welcome to the City of Foster City Estero Municipal Improvement District regular special meeting of Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, 9 a.m. Members of the public that wish to attend and/or participate in the meeting may do so in person or by joining the Zoom. Public comments will be accepted both in person and via Zoom. Any emails sent to publiccomment@fostercity.org have been provided to the council prior to the meeting.
Yeah, I'd like to call the meeting to order and like make a few comments to start with. And for those that have attended any of our retreats in the past, you're not going to see any staff reports. This is an all-day session, and what it is a think tank and for any of the council members to look at the vision, both near-term and long-term. And we have all the department heads present who will offer their critiquing and their perspectives from their various departments. And if you have insomnia or suffering from sleep apnea, this is a good thing to tape. You may fall asleep with it, watching it. Anyway, call it to order.
Item 2, roll call. Council members ex officio EMID directors Stacy Jimenez.
I'm here.
Susie Niederhofer.
Present.
Patrick Sullivan.
Present.
Phoebe Venkat.
Here.
And Mayor President Art Kiesel.
Here.
Item 3, public. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items listed on the agenda. As a reminder, we're taking comments in a live meeting format. Anyone who wants to provide public comment in person, please fill out a yellow speaker slip and hand it to me. Anyone who wants to provide public comment on Zoom, please raise their hand during this time. We'll take in-person speakers first, followed by those on Zoom.
Any?
And I do not see any public comment.
Okay. Next.
Item 4, recess into study session for 4.1 City Council Annual Retreat.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, this is a little different than past retreats in that we're conducting this meeting here in council chambers, and it is being recorded and live streamed. Is that what we call this? Live streamed as we speak. So as we go through the day, this is supposed to be somewhat informal. So if you do need to stand up and stretch, if you need to go get some water, we have the new water fill thing that is in the conference room right next to us. Feel free to get up as you need to go do that, to use the facilities. We'll try to take some breaks in between sessions, and all of that is your prerogative when you want to do that. As the mayor mentioned, this will be an all-day event. We will try to break at around noon for lunch. Lunch will be served here again in the conference room. That is open to the public. The food is for the council and the staff, but if the public would like to attend that and come into the conference room and listen into whatever discussions happen in there, you are welcome. If you want to bring your own food and come in and have a sandwich while we're eating, feel free. Hopefully now we don't have 100 people show up trying to cram in there that have heard this. But we'll do everything we can to accommodate. We're going to start the session. If it pleases the council, Ben, our city attorney, is going to spend some time talking a little bit about the Brown Act and how maybe if there are any changes to the law, how that applies, and he's going to try to put this into a practical setting for the city council, so that as you go through your meetings and you're out in the public and doing those kinds of things, that you know what to look for. So if it's okay with the council, we'll turn the time over to Ben, and he'll do his presentation. And again, during these presentations, this is a work session. So as council has questions or you want to discuss certain things, my advice is go ahead and speak up. This is really geared towards being a discussion. So
I wanted to reiterate that this is a very informal meeting.
Yeah, the idea really is to allow the council to talk about the things that are important. You've received from me a very draft recommended agenda. We can follow that. We don't have to follow that. All of this is council's prerogative. This is an open discussion time to talk about your ideas, things that are coming up, where your priorities are. Staff is taking a lot of notes. We're going to try to bring together all of the stuff that's talked about as priorities come up, package those, and then as we need future meetings to discuss these, whether it's work sessions or things placed on council agenda during the year, we will do that.
Yeah, and also bring out, please stay on topic. When we're on a topic, let's keep from digressing and going down different rabbit holes when we are talking about something. So,
Okay.
I'll look for that. Okay. Counselor.
That's a perfect introduction to the Brown Act, Mayor. Stay on track and stay on agenda. That's the big takeaway from today. I don't know, is that working? Oh, gosh, I guess I have to hold it like Marlene said. No, that's all right. I've always wanted to hold a microphone for an hour. So I'm going to go through our Brown Act presentation. I encourage you to stop me and ask questions as I go if you have any questions. Stefan wanted me to make this as interactive as possible, and I thought how to make this interactive, and you know what? I'm a lawyer, so I'm just going to talk. And you need to interrupt me if you have questions. I have a couple hypos, but by and large, I can describe some of the high points of the Brown Act, some of the issues you all deal with routinely, and then some of the new amendments that were just made to the Brown Act effective the first of the year. So first, as you're aware, all meetings of the legislative body of a local agency must be open and public. That's the hallmark of the Brown Act. And all persons must be permitted to attend any meeting. So all the new legislation, all the decisions under the Brown Act go to these principles. Have it open and public and available for the public. The basic rule for a legislative body is any gathering a majority of the members of a legislative body at the same time and location to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action upon any item which is within the subject matter jurisdiction. That's what is considered a meeting. So again, I think it's important to look at that last bullet point, to hear. It's not just discuss, deliberate, or take action, and upon any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. So I routinely receive questions from council members in all my jurisdictions of, well, I just heard this. I didn't say anything with a bunch of my colleagues. That is a meeting under the Brown Act. Just being in the same place and time, unless there's an exception that we'll get into later, if you're hearing things that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city, that is considered a meeting. And again, subject matter jurisdiction doesn't mean what's going to be on a future agenda. I also get that question routinely. We're done with this agenda item, so I can talk about my colleagues, right? No, it's still within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. Even if we've had it on a past agenda, whether we're going to have it on a current agenda, or whether there's no contemplation of it being on agenda, but it's something the city could act on. Anything that the city can do, that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. And then what is a legislative body? It obviously includes the city council. It also includes standing committees, commissions. But what's not a legislative body are ad hoc advisory committees that make up less than a quorum of the council. The other hallmark of the Brown Act is allowing opportunity for the public to address the legislative body. Regular meeting agendas must provide opportunity for general public comment. Special meeting agendas must only provide opportunity for public comment on specific items of the agenda. And a legislative body can adopt reasonable regulations to limit time allotted for public comments so long as time limits are applied equally to all speakers. So we have in our municipal code 3 minutes that we allow the public to speak. So that's a reasonable regulation that we can enforce, and we do enforce. We just have to make sure we enforce it equally to everyone when we're using that. This, in the last, since the pandemic, has become a topic discussed frequently, and as the council, some of you who are on the council at the time recall, has had a big effect on the cities once we went remote. Limits on public participation. we can remove persons, presiding officers may remove persons for disrupting a meeting following consultation with the city attorney. The statutory definition of disruption means engaging in behavior during a meeting that actually disrupts, disturbs, impedes, or renders infeasible the orderly conduct of the meeting. So as we've done in the past, if that happens, we take a pause, we warn the speaker, and the speaker continues to disturbing or impeding or rendering infeasible the orderly conduct of our meeting, we have the authority to remove that speaker either physically in chambers or online. And we've done that in the past. Disruptions include failure to comply with reasonable and lawful regulations adopted by the body, engaging in behavior that constitutes a use of force or a true threat of force. True threat of force means threat that has sufficient indicia of intent and seriousness that a reasonable observer would perceive it to be an actual threat to use force by the person making a threat. We haven't had that situation since I've been the city attorney of Foster City, but we do have failure to comply with reasonable and lawful regulations adopted by the body. We have, as I said, we have a 3-minute rule. We can remove people who go over that time frame if they don't stop once they're prompted to stop. And again, before removing any disruptor, you should consult with the city attorney. The presiding officer should warn the person that the behavior is disrupting the meeting and a failure to cease their behavior may result in the removal. If the person does not promptly cease the disruptive behavior, the person can be removed. If order still cannot be restored, the meeting room may be cleared and all attendees, however, may be cleared of all attendees. However, members of the news media who have not participated in the disturbance must be allowed to continue to attend the meeting. There was a recent case about a month ago involving the city of Oakland, where the city of Oakland, or sorry, city of Berkeley. The city of Berkeley couldn't restore order, so they called a recess. They blocked the members of the public from coming back into the chambers, and when they reconvened in a different room, not in the chambers, because they couldn't secure the chambers. And they allowed the press to be in that reconvened location. The Court of Appeal in the published decision said the city violated the Brown Act because they had to be reconvening in the chambers because that's what was on the notice of the agenda. And it was a pretty passionate opinion by a dissenter of the court. It was a 2-1. And the dissenter said, that's just unrealistic. You're creating conflict by making them stay in that space. But the majority said that may be true, but the legislature should amend it to say they can go anywhere at that location and they don't have to be reconvening the exact same location. Anyway, there's those sort of ambiguities that even in the moment, I don't fault the city attorney. She was trying to do what was right to make sure there's no, trying to restore order, but you can trip over the language if you're not careful enough. The agenda noticing requirements has to be a brief description of the item, 20 words or less is what the Brown Act says. Substantial compliance is the test. So you'll look, if we're talking about an item that is substantially compliant with the agenda notice, we can talk about it. If it's off topic, as the mayor referenced earlier, trying to avoid us to go off topic, we can't talk about it. Courts will look at whether the agenda language considered as a whole gives the public more than a clue. Again, it's about transparency and having the public know what we're talking about when we convene in our open session meetings. As I've had to do many times here in all my cities, I have to remind the council we can't talk on items that are not agendized. We can't go off script. Action or discussion on any item not appearing on the posted agenda is generally prohibited. Exceptions include, you can briefly respond to public statements or questions. Briefly means short, concise statements approximately less than a minute. So when we have someone come up and give public comment and you want to briefly respond, it really does mean just that, brief. If several council members then briefly respond and there's a back and forth, I'll be cutting that off because you can't have some sort of deliberation on that off-topic agenda item. You can only briefly respond. You can also, at the end of our meetings, we have an agenda item to make brief announcements on report and activities. Again, it's meant to be a one-way communication by that council member talking about their activities and that happened at the previous month is how we've historically done that. If another council member starts chiming in about that, that can violate the Brown Act. It's really not meant a discussion item for that report. It's just a report. You can always ask for questions for clarification. That's not,
Yeah, Ben?
Ben?
yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I sit on a bicycle pedestrian committee, and a lot of the people are council people from other cities. So in the discussion, each city might be doing something for e-bikes or pedestrians. So in essence, and it is a public thing that is, the public can participate. Does the participation of the public protect us from making a comment of not saying what our city's doing, but what we're looking at?
You're sitting on a standing committee of the city or of a regional body?
Region.
Yeah, the fact that it's a standing committee, it's noticed under the Brown Act. There'll be a slide on that coming up. When we have a standing committee, whether it's our own standing committee or a joint standing committee, a regional body, that's a Brown Act body. They have to notice their meetings. So as part of that noticing, it gives the ability for you to talk about issues that are confronting the city at that body.
Okay.
And vice versa, other council members who are on that committee can also talk about what's happening in their cities. And then I would just want to highlight, we've had this resolution now for 2 years, 2024-67. It's also not a Brown Act violation to request a matter be put on a future agenda, as long as we follow the process that the council adopted to communicate with the city manager ahead of time, and then at the end of the meeting, you can bring it up as a future agenda item. And again, whenever that happens, I'm very guarded about making sure you all don't discuss the merits of that future agenda item. It's just simply, should it be on the agenda?
Is
Ben?
that process pretty common, you would say, across the board for like local city councils?
I'll say it's common for cities to have a process in writing.
Okay.
So we have a lot of cities differ in their types of processes of how they bring an item forward. Some require a more elaborate process. Some require, there's different requirements. Some cities do it exactly how we do it. It really does span.
We changed ours, right, like a few years ago?
Yeah, so we changed, well, since I've been here, we've had 3 different policies.
Okay.
So the policy before that was different, and the policy before that was different. And again, all those policies, there's some city doing one of those policies. None of them were outliers. It just depends on, the flexibility and the ability to get something on the agenda quicker, I think is what led to 2024, the resolution, where you consult with the city manager, don't blindside staff. That's a very common, critique of cities wanting the council members to come to staff first before you put something on the agenda to make sure it's not, not duplication of effort, and then bring it forward.
Thanks.
Ben, a question for you. When we have, somebody wants to put something on the agenda, without going into detail, how, somebody wants to do that, how am I supposed to know how detailed it is for me to even say I want to put it on the agenda or not?
So the person making the request should provide as much detail to make the council comfortable to put it on the agenda. I think that's your question. If it's something very nebulous and you feel uncertain about it, then you can say no, because I don't have enough details of what you're asking for. If it's something where you're asking them to do a full report, I would have to intervene at that point, because that's not required to have an agenda item, a future agenda item. It's just, it has to be a succinct statement of what the issue is and what the council would consider at that future date.
So with
The impacts of it and all, the effects of that agenda item, that's for you all to debate when it's actually on the agenda. It's not really proper for a debate of whether to put it on the agenda.
Yeah, aren't you treading a thin line there as to
Yeah, it's a
deliberation
it's a
and
thin line,
and
and I'm going to
lobbying?
err on the conservative side. So that's usually, we cut off those conversations on the conservative side of, if just say yes or no, do you want it on the agenda?
Well, that part, but understanding whether I'm saying yes or no too, that's my issue. Go. Oh, Penn, you wanted something?
Yeah. Yeah. Could you explain, and it's in highlight, briefly respond to public statements or questions? I mean, sure, is that the body of the mayor to make that decision? It's a little unclear because it appears the policy we've always taken, if it's not on the agenda, they can't speak to it.
That's the
Isn't that
general rule.
correct?
That's the general rule, but the Brown Act literally has this, exception. So if someone comes forward in public comment and says, Mayor, you were out there in my neighborhood, tearing up my crosswalk or tearing up my flowers, how dare you? And, the mayor is off agenda. The mayor could respond by saying, I dispute that, but I'm not going to go into that. I mean, he's briefly responding. But if he gives a whole, soliloquy of why he disputes that he was tearing up the, person's flowers, I don't know. When I create these hypos, I just kind of get myself in a corner. It's not a great hypo, but he can briefly respond to the allegation, or someone else coming forward and saying, the city's not doing enough with traffic. The mayor or any one of you can briefly respond, as envisioned, saying, please reach out to the city manager and he'll explain all the things we do for traffic relief, something along those lines. Or please, if it has to do with any of your departments, please reach out to, the Public Works if it has to do with Public Works. You can briefly respond to, and that's how councils usually deal with things that are not on the agenda and brought up in public comment. They try to funnel that person to the right person within the organization that can offline answer their questions and try to address the situation that they're raising it during public comment.
Okay, so this is a new level under the Brown Act.
It's always been there, and we do it routinely. It's just,
Right.
this is the authority for allowing us to do that.
Okay.
Phoebe? Oh, I'll give it to you.
Mayor Kiesel, I was just building off what you were asking about or raising. You're trying to see a distinction between, like, for example, at our last council meeting, Councilmember Jimenez raised a potential agenda item, right? A bill that we wanted to discuss. So I supported that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm telling people I'm supporting.
Oh, no,
Right,
no.
okay,
Correct.
yeah. Okay.
Oh, I wasn't inferring that at all.
Oh, no, I mean, like, is that what you're trying to distinguish between?
Do I have enough information
Okay.
to understand what it is in this, and you're using Stacy in this case, what she's proposing? I want to agendize traffic. That's pretty nebulous. What does that mean? What do you want to talk about? I need some clarity, some detail.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair game. If someone was as broad as, I want to agendize traffic, you could say, what about traffic? I want to agendize a traffic light on this intersection. And then if you kept saying, well, why do we need a traffic light? That's when I'm going to come in and say, that's not appropriate to talk about why we need that there. The topic is the traffic signal at this intersection.
Phoebe, does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Okay, Stefan?
Just, something came up in another city where during the public comment period, and I know when public comment is given, sometimes the public wants to comment about things that are not within the council's jurisdiction or within the city's jurisdiction. Are those things allowed? In other words, I want to come up and talk about some global event that's going on and my concerns with that and encouraging the council. Do we allow that kind of public comment to continue for the 3 minutes, or is that something that the city attorney might step in and say, council, this is really not pertinent to what this council decides or does?
Well, again, that's a great question because that's what we face with Zoom bombing to a certain extent, where it's not within the subject matter jurisdiction. Them coming online and saying whatever, hatred-filled vitriol they want to spew has nothing to do with our subject matter jurisdiction of what a city can, react to.
Right.
So in those circumstances, it's very easy to say that's not within the subject matter jurisdiction. We're warning you to get back on target. If not, we're cutting you off. When someone comes forward with some global issue, whatever the global issue is, and wants the council to do some sort of proclamation, that's a little harder to say. It's not within our subject matter jurisdiction because cities do take stands through their organizations on those issues, even if it's not something that is, the city can necessarily affect the change. We don't control global politics. Cities routinely do that, and if your city has done that in the past, it's really hard to say you can't, that's not within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city.
Okay. The second question I have with public comment, I have been in cities before where the public comments that were, a public comment was directed at a staff member. It was a personal allegation. It happened to be an ex-husband of a member of the staff who wanted to come in and make some pretty slanderous kind of remarks. And the mayor cut the person off immediately, turned off the microphone, and told him to sit down, that this isn't the appropriate location. Is that the correct thing to do? And is there a difference between the city council, where you have a constituent that's up there attacking a member of the council or criticizing, versus a member of the community, or not a member of the community, that is coming in and directing their vitriol, if you will, or their hatred or whatever towards a member of the staff or other members of the community?
Well,
Is that allowed, or does that get cut off as
So
well?
the first hypo you gave about a family issue, that's definitely not allowed. So the mayor correctly cut them out. Again, that's not within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. But, something between a husband and wife or a family members, and coming to blast them publicly. But the second issue, if someone comes, I'll use me as an example because it's happened, blasts me and not the council members about me and what a horrible city attorney and how awful I am and how mean I can be. That's fair game. You can't cut someone off for criticizing staff.
As long as it's related to the job and the work, but if it's related to personal stuff,
Correct.
then that gets cut off.
Yep.
Susie?
Thank you. This might have been a couple slides ago, but let's say there is a hot topic. The council chambers is packed and people are lined up to give public comment. We have a 3-minute rule. Can that rule be changed at the time of the council meeting to say, we're going to give you 1 minute because there's so many people here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we have in our code that the council can decide a lesser amount of time in order to conduct its business properly. And the one instance where that happened to us, where we had a very hot topic, one of the concerns we had during that topic was people were hopping on Zoom, giving comments, and it was hard for the clerk to figure out who had already spoken and who had not. So we took a recess. We made a clear announcement to the people on Zoom, raise your hands, we're making a list. At that point, we're done taking new hands. And we worked our way through that list. So you're allowed to create clear rules in order for you to get through the agenda item. And the code explicitly allows us to make the time limits less in order to get through the items on our agenda.
Yeah, but Ben, we did that.
Hold on. Let Susie
I just
finish.
have one more comment about the bringing up a request for a future agenda. I just want to say I find that our rule very helpful to talk to the city manager first, because that gives me some sense of
Perspective.
perspective, however you want to say that, it's an item that's worthy to come forward. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay. Now, Pat.
Yeah, apology. Yeah, Ben, we did that exactly with the ceasefire of the Middle East. If you recall, what we did is we limited the speech to 1 minute. The one question I had, we also, when we had people on FaceTime or calling in, we had supposedly a large number of people on that. And then at a certain point, it was the discretion that we cut it off. We didn't go to all of them.
It wasn't discretion.
okay,
We took a recess, and what we did was we asked everyone who hadn't spoke to raise their hand. We made a list of those people, kept track of them, and didn't allow new hands to be raised. So we didn't just arbitrarily say, okay, we're done. But we could. I mean, cities are allowed to set a time period for public comment. We're going to have public comment for 1 hour and get through as many as we can with 1 minute. And people who don't get a chance, don't get a chance. There's no requirement in the Brown Act that every person be able to speak at public comment. We're allowed to create rules when the volume is going to prevent the city from effectively moving forward with its agenda.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I know we had 85 on the chamber at that time. We had 120 on Zoom, so that kind of answers Susie's question. Thank you.
Can I add something to that real quick? Oftentimes, we request that if there's a large group that wants to speak on a singular item, oftentimes we'll request that they choose a spokesperson that is going to speak on their behalf. But am I correct in saying you cannot require that? You cannot say, only one of you, the rest of you can't speak. If all of them want to speak, unless you establish the time frame, you have to allow them, even if they come up and they say the same thing over and over again. Is that correct, Ben?
Correct.
We can also, in the past, what we've done is if what your comments, Speaker, are like what has been said before, please, Patrick, just say, I agree with something that's already been said and sit down. Can we make that comment and a requirement of the speaker?
You can't require the speaker, once they start speaking, to speak in a certain way. But what I see effective is, unless they're disrupting the meeting, what I see effective is mayors reminding the public when you have a matter that has a lot of people interested in it, to be clear that we don't need you to repeat comments that others have already made. You can simply come up here and say, I agree with that position, or show of hands. You can do that too. If someone has a comment that resonates with members, they can raise their hand. And, so the council can get a sense of how many people in the chambers agree with that position. So there's different ways of asking the community not to come up and regurgitate the same points over and over again. But if they're speaking, you can't cut them off and say, hey,
No, I wasn't meaning cutting them off, just make that an announcement before anybody comes up.
But that announcement is a request, correct? We're asking them to do that. If they choose not to, we can't say, sorry, stop, don't talk. You're saying the same
That's
thing.
fine. Yeah, and which is what we've done in the past. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Ben, continue.
All right. Teleconferencing. Foster City is very advanced. When I first came here, I was blown away by your technology. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and you guys were all set up, and everything was running smoothly. So, Rob, that you're out there somewhere, I know. So there's the traditional teleconferencing rule, and then there's the AB 2449 Just Cause Emergency Circumstance teleconferencing rules. So the old traditional method was you have to post the agenda where you're located. You can teleconference remotely as long as that place is open for the public, that location, and it shows up on our agenda. During the pandemic, AB 2449 was signed into law, which provided more flexibility for council members to join a meeting remotely as long as there was just cause or emergency circumstances. SB 707 just got rid of the expiration date of AB 2449, so now it's going to continue on indefinitely. SB 707, which is the new legislation on the Brown Act that I mentioned earlier, that we're going to have a whole other discussion about. But SB 707 also merged the concepts of just cause and emergency into one exception, not two separate exceptions, where it used to be two separate exceptions. So there, all that needs to be done is if you're appearing under the 2449, you just need to state it at the beginning of the meeting. Just cause, I'm not going to read it verbatim. Those are the reasons for just cause on the slide. Most common one that many of my council members take advantage of is the contagious illness that prevents you from attending in person. And then emergency circumstances, which you used to have a vote by the council to grant you the emergency circumstance, but with SB 707, they merged it into one, and there's no more requirement for council to have to approve emergency circumstances. So these are the emergency circumstances. You can only use AB 2449 for Foster City. It's that second bullet point, 5 meetings per year, since we meet twice per month. for purposes of applying the limitations on meetings. It's also defined by, if you're part of a standing committee that only meets once a month, you have to, you can only appear remotely 2 meetings per year. So it's per body, it's not aggregate. And then, so now I'm going to move on to, if there's any questions about teleconferencing, that was that. We're going to go into SB 707. We're going to actually have a council agenda item in the future about SB 707, about some of the new requirements that are coming online the council's going to have to grapple with. But I have a few more slides later about SB 707. Any questions about teleconferencing?
How does that apply on certain items where you might need a majority of the council to vote on it? Are they entitled to vote on every issue,
If you're
even though
properly,
they're not present?
yeah, if you're properly appearing via the teleconferencing rules, it counts as an appearance, as if you're in the council chambers. So you can vote, you can participate in the meeting, just like you would if you're sitting at the dais. All right, improper serial meetings, my favorite topic. So again, a majority of the members of legislative bodies shall not use a series of communications of any kind directly or through intermediaries to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. And there's 2 most common types of serial meetings. One is the daisy chain. If member A contacts member B and member B contacts member C and so on until a quorum has been involved, this type of serial meeting may result in a violation of the Brown Act. So again, if you're contacting one of your colleagues and that colleague then contacts a third about some, just to discuss, not even to get their opinion, but just discuss an item that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city, that's a Brown Act violation. And then the hub and spoke is also a very common issue for you all to watch out for. When an intermediary contacts at least a quorum of the members to develop a collective concurrence among the council members on an action to be taken by the body. So I've seen this happen in the past where, let's use the developer as an example for an entitlement project he or she's working on. The developer contacts 2 council members and asks, is there anything I can do to, answer any questions you may have about this project? And the council members reply, to the developer, I have these questions, but I'm generally in favor of the project. The council member who sends that email only sees one other council member, or maybe he's just the only council member on that email, and thinks, not a Brown Act issue, it's just me and the developer having a conversation. If the developer takes that email and forwards it to several others, it's a Brown Act violation. So just keep that in mind, that even your conversations that don't appear to be a Brown Act issue, if you're having them, they still can be a Brown Act issue. And it's important for you to tell that person who's asking for your opinion, who's asking for your, any questions you have about a project, that these are my issues. Do not report these issues to any other of my colleagues on the council. It's really incumbent on you, because the developers, or most folks, don't understand the Brown Act, and you are all charged with doing that. So it's really important to recognize that your communication is to the community, and you have a zillion a day probably. If that person then goes to talk to 2 other council members and reports on what the other council members said, that's a problem. The other way of dealing with it is when that person comes to you and says, oh, council member A has told me X, Y, and Z. Before he or she even says, council member A has told me, just cut them off. Say, I can't know what that council member said. Please do not communicate that with me. I can talk with you, but don't tell me what your conversations with council members have been. That's another way of insulating yourself and the city from any sort of Brown Act violation.
So it would be reasonable to begin with, if somebody contacts you, the example you have, is ask them, are they going to be contacting any other council members?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And if the answer is no, you have a little bit more assurances, but I still think
Doesn't
if the answer
protect
is
you.
no, you just still say, okay, good, because you can't communicate what I'm about to tell you to other council members who want to avoid any Brown Act issues.
Thank you.
Ben, I have a question. It's an example that has happened where I understand that when we can't reply all, if someone emails the council. But I also find that very constraining because I just want to be able to let the rest of the council know, hey, I think I got this one, so let me work with this person, talk to them, and then they don't get 5 separate replies, and then other council members don't have to reply if they don't feel the need to. Is there any kind of flexibility just around that first, like, hey, I will take this one?
I have a slide on that one.
Oh, okay. I will wait. Tee that up for me, okay.
But to answer your question, I mean, again, it's like that Berkeley example I just gave. The city attorney in that instance was trying to come up with a practical solution to deal with the issue that she confronted that night, and the Court of Appeal dinged her. So the Brown Act is very specific, and that is a violation of the Brown Act, to reply to all to a council member email, to a council group. So, unfortunately, there is no simple solution. The best solution is not to do a reply to all in order to avoid a Brown Act violation.
Yeah, because then what I do is end up explaining to the person, usually a layperson, what the Brown Act is, and because I don't want them to think the other council members don't care. And I'm like, wow, I'm spending 2 to 3 sentences explaining that to them when they're asking me about like noise of the leaf blowers or something like that. Just to put that out there. I know you don't have control over the Brown Act. I think sometimes the people who actually create these rules, they're not understanding that most people don't know what the Brown Act is. So when they think that I don't want people to think only one council member cares. It's more that, we're trying to make this as streamlined as possible while working within the Brown Act constraints. And you'll speak to that, so I'll just shut up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate the problem that presents, but really, we can't do a reply to all. That's really the most common trap that cities fall into. And it's why I hate the council all email group, because it happens all the time, but every city outvotes me on that. So, but I think at the end of the day, that's the trouble with the group email, is it can lead to these results of a Brown Act violation.
Ben, can I add to that question? So we sometimes get emails from somebody from a resident, and it's something simple that maybe, I don't know if any of us know, but I would like to send it to staff, Stefan or Marlene, and say, here, do you have a response, or do you have any information on this? But I feel like I can't include everybody else. So are they getting like 5 emails of the same thing saying, can we include everybody when we send it to staff?
The response is, yes, sometimes we are getting 5 emails. That's okay. That's our job. When we respond to you all, we'll blind copy. If we don't, then we'll find out what happened and fix it. But no, we try to blind copy back to you, so.
And, the legislators made this rule, but it doesn't apply to them. So it just applies to cities. So there's that. Improper electric meetings, use of emails, which we just covered, but texts or other technology media by a majority of the legislative body to discuss, deliberate, or take action on items within the body's jurisdiction violates the Brown Act. Again, this is the slide I was referencing. Avoid sending emails to the whole body, even if it's a reply. I underlined it, I bolded it, and I italicized it. I tried to make it bigger font, but then I messed up the slide. But that really is the takeaway of this slide. When replying to emails, please just reply to the sender if you and acknowledge. Sometimes it's as simple as I saw one recently where there's a natural disaster that happened, and they wrote the whole council about it. And even a compassionate, we're here to help, and here's what we can do. That is not appropriate under the Brown Act. It really needs to be replying to that one person and take the council off the thread. Think carefully before sending any email. Remember, your email can be forwarded by others to a majority of the body. So it gets into what I was saying earlier about the developer hypo. Even if you think it's just a one-way communication, that communication can be used to transmit your thoughts to others, which can implicate the Brown Act. And the internet has a very, very, very long memory. Social media communications is a separate section of the Brown Act. And this was enacted a few years back, and SB 707 removed the sunset date for this rule. Council members can communicate on social media platforms to answer questions, provide information to the public, or solicit information from the public. Council members cannot respond directly to any communication posted or shared by another member regarding city business on an internet-based social media platform. So the most common hypo that happens is a council member says, post something about a city issue. And another council member does the thumbs up, or the emoji smiley face, or the crying face, or the green face, or whatever face you want to do. That's a violation of the Brown Act. Even if it's not a quorum doing it, it's just one council member. So that's the rule that was enacted several years ago, and SB 707 has now cemented it into the Brown Act indefinitely. Meetings with city staff is an exception to a lot of the issues we just talked about. A city employee can engage in separate conversations or communications outside of a meeting to answer questions and provide information, so long as that city employee does not communicate to members of the legislative body the comments or positions of any other members or member. So again, this is your one-on-ones with the city manager on a weekly basis. That's the authority for those one-on-ones. And likewise, when you talk to staff about anything that's going on, you have that ability, and they have the ability to give you information. So this has come up, interestingly, we've had 2 recent emails directed to the council about events that fall into 2 different exceptions of non-meetings for 2 different reasons. So a meeting, I gave you the broad definition earlier, and here's the exceptions to when something's not a meeting. When it's attendance by a majority of members at a conference that is related to the business of the agency that is open to the public. It doesn't have to be free to the public, it just has to be open to the public. So an example of this is the League of California Cities annual conference. You can all go there. It's not a Brown Act violation. You can all be in the same room on a certain panel, and it's not a Brown Act violation, as long as that a majority do not discuss amongst themselves the business of a specific nature that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency. So 3 of you can't, start talking about that panel's discussion and what it means to the city. That's a Brown Act violation. And again, for all these hypos or all these non-meeting exceptions, I emphasize that it's important for perception to rule the day. I don't like it when council members, whether it's a league or whether it's a local event, all sit together in the meeting. It just gives a perception to the community that you're all talking amongst yourselves, which is, you're allowed to go to these events as long as you don't talk amongst yourselves. So I always encourage you all, even if you think you're not going to talk amongst yourselves and you just want to sit next to each other, to spread out and be conscious of that sometimes perception is more important than the actual rule. The other exception is attendance by majority of members at an open and publicized meeting organized to address a topic of local community concern by a person or organization other than the local agency. Again, provided that a majority of members do not discuss amongst themselves business of a specific nature that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency. So on this one, I think we recently had an invitation, it might have been today, or I forget when the invitation was, but the county is holding an e-bike meeting that was organized by the county. It's okay for you all to attend that because it's open and public for all the members of the community to participate. But again, you can't talk about it with each other at that meeting, but you can participate in the program. If there's time for public comment, you can give public comment. If the question's asked you as part of the program of what Foster City's doing, you can respond, but you can't unilaterally, more than 3 of you talk about what the city's doing. Yeah.
Ben, I think you kind of touched on, even an advisory committee member is still under the Brown Act in regards to talking to other council members. Is that not true?
Correct.
So in that capacity, anybody on a committee, whether it's a planning commission or an advisory committee, really fit under the Brown Act?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Attendance by majority of members at an open and notice meeting of another body of a local agency or meeting of a legislative body, another body of the local agency or meeting of a legislative body of another local agency. Again, provided you don't talk amongst yourselves. So this is, there's two situations this involves. One, if the county board of supervisors has an agenda item, or the Airport Land Commission has the EIR that's coming up for certification, and you all want to give testimony at that commission, you're permitted to under this exception. You can go to the, a notice public meeting of another body, a majority of you can, and participate on that item as any member of the public would. You just can't talk amongst yourselves about the item. Likewise, another body of our city, you can all attend if it's a proper, so the planning commission is a good example. You can attend, you can give public comment, you can listen as part of that agenda item. I would caution you though, under the Brown Act, that may be permissible, but under due process, if the item is going to come up to the council at a certain point, it's not advisable. You should wait for the item to come to you before you give public comment to the planning commission on a certain item. We have liaisons to those commissions. Again, the role of the liaison is just to listen. And when it comes back to the council, share what happened at the lower body. The role of the liaison is not to actively participate at that body. It's really just to hear what's going on and relay that to the council at the appropriate time. Any questions on that loaded topic? Okay. And then my favorite, the ribbon cuttings. So that's another, you're allowed to be there, a majority, as long as, again, you don't talk about business of the city at that ribbon cutting. So it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of people in the community there. Sometimes there's a conversation that someone wants to do, but if it's not noticed as a Brown Act meeting, you really have to keep your comments if it has to do with business of specific natures that's in the subject matter jurisdiction, you have to keep that to yourself. You can, talk to someone one-on-one at those meetings, at those ribbon cuttings, but to give some sort of comments globally to everyone present, that could be interpreted as a Brown Act violation. So just cut the ribbon and say how happy you are, if you want to make me happy. Non-meetings also attends a majority of members at an open and notice meeting of a standing committee. So again, I think Patrick raised this earlier. We have a legislative committee that is a standing committee that meets periodically. Members can attend that. A majority of the council can attend those standing committee meetings, provided, again, you only attend as an observer. And I'm going to have a couple of brief slides on SB 707. Like I said, we're going to have an agenda item, I believe in March or February? Okay. Soon. Talking about more in-depth SB 707, but I just want to give you the real broad brush outlines of what's going to be happening. It was aimed, SB 707, like many amendments to the Brown Act, was aimed at improving access, transparency. The bill will create significant operational, fiscal, and other challenges for public agencies as they make changes to comply with these new laws. Foster City is subject to the new requirements because we're located in a county with a population of over 600,000. So every city in San Mateo County is going to be subject to SB 707. The public must be able to attend meetings and participate remotely and provide comments in real time via two-way telephonic or two-way audiovisual platform. And here's the requirements of that. I think a big departure from what's happened in the past. We have these advisements on our agendas that if technology doesn't work, we're moving on with our meeting. SB 707 says we can't do that. So we have to have a policy in place to deal with disruptions to telephonic and internet service. And at a minimum, we have to recess open session for at least 1 hour and attempt in good faith to restore the service if something happens. So we no longer can just say, sorry, it's not working, we're going to move on with the meeting. We're going to have to try to fix it and take a recess. And we're going to develop a policy, and that's going to come forward to the council at some point. Yep.
Yeah, just a question on that. Because of the population of 600. So cities could violate the Brown Act by, I'm just saying hypothetical, let's say collectively 3 or 4 city managers are opposed to something. and they're kind of directing the staff or the council to go a certain direction. So is there a Brown Act violation in that capacity?
No.
What does this cover then? Why do they have that there?
707?
Yeah,
It doesn't have to do with city managers. It has to do with the cities of a certain population size. And if that's triggered, they have to comply with all these new requirements for teleconferencing, for translation services. I'm not sure if I'm
but
understanding.
we don't have a population of, you know.
It has to do with
that
cities
fits-
over 30,000 or cities that are located in a county over 600,000. So we are located in a county of over 600,000.
Right, so what is the connection? I'm trying to understand why would that rule be in place?
That's a good question for the state legislator.
Okay, that's the
they
advanced,
enacted this
that's the
legislation.
advanced course, okay.
That's coming in the spring, is that
Yeah.
correct?
So SB 707?
Yeah.
Some of it was effective January 1st of this year, and we're already in compliance. And some of it comes online July 1st.
Yeah, but what did your previous slide? It said something you're gonna be talking about.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
you did.
our next council meeting, we're going to have an agenda item on SB 707 and the actions the city has to take to
I
comply.
just wanna let you know I'm reading the slides.
Again, some of the other highlights, we have to reasonably assist members of the public who wish to translate a public meeting in any language or wish to receive an interpretation provided by another member of the public, so long as it does not disrupt the meeting. So we have to facilitate and assist members translate council meetings into their preferred language. We don't have to necessarily provide that translation, but if someone comes here with some technology that helps them understand our meetings, which is now happening very quickly, this technology, we have to facilitate that to the extent we can. We have to provide real-time captioning if our two-way audio-visual platform is provided and if the function is included in that platform. That's something we're exploring right now with staff. Agenda translation, if according to the American Community Survey, language spoken jointly by 20% or more of the applicable population, provide that 20% or more of the population speaks that language in that city or county speaks English less than very well. For Foster City, staff has determined that the agenda will need to be translated into Chinese. So that's going to be a new requirement that we're going to be doing. And then we have to make reasonable efforts to invite groups that do not traditionally participate in public meetings to attend meetings. So we're analyzing that and coming up with ways to meet that requirement. So that's SB 707. As I said, we're going to have an agenda item in February about that and more issues of SB 707. Closed sessions, I'm out of times, but I think you all know the rules of the closed sessions, that it's the exception to the open and public policy of the Brown Act. It's in very limited circumstances, and you are unauthorized to disclose that information, as you all know. It's confidential. And if we violate any issue under the Brown Act, here's the remedies. The most common is the request to cure, and the action will be invalidated. So they send a letter saying, you violated the Brown Act, you need to cure. We decide whether we did or didn't, and if we think there's an argument that we did, we just redo the action. So you can imagine for an agenda item that took 3 hours, the last thing you want to do is get a letter afterwards saying you have to redo that agenda item. So that's why we tried our best to avoid that possibility, but if we have to, we'll move forward to redo. And then someone can bring a civil action assuming we don't cure the alleged infirmity, someone can bring a civil action to invalidate the action and prevent future violations. And cost and attorney's fees are awarded to people who prevail under the Brown Act. Yes?
Is there a statute of limitations on that?
Yes, there is.
What is the statute?
I believe it's either 30 or 60 days from the alleged Brown Act violation. I have to double check, but it's either 30, it's quick. So I think it's 30 days. I'll double check. But it's pretty quick, so we'll know if there's an alleged Brown Act violation and whether we need to do something. So I have a couple of case studies I'll briefly go through. After attending an interesting meeting of the County Board of Supervisors on issues that would affect the city, the member decides to circulate the excellent summary of county actions that may affect the city to all members of the council and ask each one of you members to let me know what you think. Please let me know if you know the answers, whether that's a violation of the Brown Act or not. Yeah. All right, good. It's a little bit of a test. It's a little bit of a test. Member X's Facebook page has a posting describing his desire to address a certain issue at next meeting. Can all the fellow members click the like button? What if less than a majority click the like button? Everyone agree? Councilmember Niederhoff?
I said can't at all. No one can respond.
It would be a serial violation of the Brown Act.
Can even just one respond? Good. It's a violation. It's separate than serial. There's an actual explicit provision in the Brown Act for social media saying if one member responds by a like, that's a violation, even if it's less than a quorum. So just don't like anything. Or just get off social media. Member X has provided. Yeah, no, I know. I'm just not a social media person, so it's easy for me to say it, but I don't have those expectations, right? Member X has provided certain documents during a closed session that he or she believes his constituents would find very helpful. Can you share those documents? Please let me know you know this answer.
Yeah.
All right. Can you verbally tell them anything?
So this is important because
Super important.
keeping your Facebook account for the council separate from your personal Facebook account, because you have to keep your presence to the public available.
Oh, we're back on the other case
Yeah.
study. Yes, so it's important, best practices, not necessarily for the Brown Act,
Correct.
but for other reasons. It's good to have two separate Facebook accounts, one for your own personal contacts and one that's more political, where you address issues that are confronting the community.
And make sure you respond to the right one.
That, but either way, if another council member likes something on one of your, on your political page, that's a violation of the Brown Act.
And Ben, I know you mentioned before, even if it's nothing to do with any kind of business per se, I remember you giving the advice, just better be safe than sorry. Because I remember when we first came together as this current council, another council member posted like a picture of us. And I was like, oh, I shared it. And you were like, oh, just don't do that going forward. So I guess better to err on the ultra safe side.
Yep.
Okay.
Our recommendation is you don't interact with each other on social media. I mean, that's the safe route. It sucks, but just don't interact with each other on social media. That's the safe route.
Any questions?
Well, I think we've asked a few. I've got one, and I want to emphasize this one, okay? Is the Senate, the state Senate, the state Assembly, or any of the legislative committees bound by the Brown Act? Coward. No. Okay. And yet they're the ones making these, AB 707 is an assembly bill.
SB, but yeah.
Oh, it's an SB Senate bill, excuse me. I just want to make that point clear. Let's do as I say, not as I do.
You could raise it
Don't
to
make a
Senator
comment,
Beckman.
I'm not asking for one. Okay. And the other one, you talked a little bit earlier about answering Patrick's question about communicating with the advisory committees. The advisory committees do they have special contact relationship with the council than Joe Citizen does, or Mary Citizen?
What do you mean by special?
The way you answered his question, it sounded to like that they become part of the Brown Act violation.
The advisory committee is a Brown Act body.
That's different, because they can't talk within each other,
Right.
as we can't.
If you're asking if one member of an advisory committee, which is, not formed of council members, but a member of the advisory committee reaches out to a council member, is that a Brown Act violation? Is that the question?
Well, it's not the question, it's what I heard you say and how I interpreted it. To me, the clarity, and correct me if I'm wrong, clarity for this is we are a body and the advisory committee is a separate body.
Correct.
We all apply to the same rules.
Correct.
The same rules apply to both. Let me rephrase that. Okay.
Yeah,
But there's no intermingling of Brown Act violations.
So in other words, Ben, if an advisory committee member reaches out to the mayor, and then afterwards reaches out to Stacy, and then afterwards reaches out to Patrick, is that a Brown Act violation
Yes.
because they reached out to a quorum?
Yes.
Individually?
Yes. Just like a member of the public.
That's what I just said.
Right.
Okay, they are a member of the public for all intents and purposes. Okay, that's clearer. Are we done with Ben?
All right. Thank you. You're done with me.
Better now.
So council, at this point, we're going to shift into the economic development discussion, if that's agreeable. I don't know if you need to set up anything. If the council would like to take a minute or two, there
Let's do
is
that.
coffee and danishes and things in the conference room if you do want to grab a coffee. I know there's no food allowed in here, but we're probably not going to say anything if you bring a Danish back to your spot to eat while you do this. We know you need to kind of get some sugar in you or something.
See, the Brown Act didn't take that into
That'll
consideration,
be the first one.
that we have a no eating rule here.
We'll just take a few minutes.
Yeah, how are you? Well, this is the. I
Thought it was going to be more
right?
entertaining.
Yeah, it's gonna get, I mean, we're gonna talk economic development, safe streets, all those exciting. I guess like, this is valuable.
Right.
Actually, I'm glad that this part is filmed, the Brown Act, because then that way I can circulate it, because many people, like, when I brought up, they don't know that we are bound by that. So they might be like, why is she replying only to me, she's trying to be
Right,
secretive?
right.
It's like, I'm not trying to be secretive, I have to follow the rules.
Right.
Right, it's not like the private sector where.
I think like, there's some disclaimer kind of at the bottom.
Yes, right, I wish, yeah, that's a good point. So, I think this is good to frame for people, yeah. So you're here for the whole day?
No,
John?
I'll
Okay.
probably go after this session.
Definitely stay for that.
Yeah.
That week, they'll have to give me a few days. So give me 2 options to get what are the, then I can start getting it on the calendar. So March wasn't it like any time between 10 and 4 p.m. Are you planning to be here where you two then take a tour of the city? Because then what I can do, I can then give them a flexibility not more than this. This way you can see you have 2 individual mornings that happen and we can leave and then again March 5th. Okay, we'll do that.
All right, August 1, back office, yes.
Yes.
So they must have made, so and they overreact sometimes. End up creating all these other issues, like community things like that. I have the staff teacher position. Right, exactly, yeah. Right.
Yeah, then, yeah.
So they might just think, oh.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell Rob to elevate Thomas. So that at least he can listen in.
Yes,
I'm sorry, this is not an introduction. If, I don't know how much time you're gonna have. I can.
How are you?
Okay, sorry about this.
Yeah. From Cosmos.
Okay. Yes, okay.
Buster, that was a good question on the agenda question. That was, are you know,
is one of council's topmost priorities, including but not limited to, strengthening our city's commercial areas, reducing vacancies and leakages, and also the long-term economic vitality of the city. As a result, on February 2nd, you all authorized to enter into an agreement with Cosmont Companies and to conduct a real estate analysis for the entire city. You had a chance to briefly talk to Ken Hira from Cosmont Companies via Zoom, who's here with us today to talk about the same analysis and how we're going to go about it. If time permits, I do have a presentation. If you recall, last year I did present an overview of certain vacancies in the city. I do want to note, and I'm very pleased to know that last year was a very, we made a good progress in filling some of those vacancies. I have been including those in our council updates. But if there is a time, I can again go through all those vacancies that we were able to fill in 2025. With that, now, we'll talk to Ken, who's here to give us an overview of this analysis that he's going to undertake. Thank you. Over to Ken.
I apologize, that was something, is there a report out now?
No, there's no report. It's just a study.
So is this just in general conversation as we've already spoke before with him?
He's just going to give an overview of this analysis that Cosmont Companies is going to undertake.
Okay, and then we've already kind of discussed that with the packet that was already provided us in the last council meeting. Is that correct? So there's...
February 2nd was just an authorization to enter into an agreement.
Okay.
So now that
All
we
right.
have agreement underway, we have Ken Hira who's going to just provide an overview.
Okay, well, good morning, Mayor and members of the council. I was on Zoom the other evening. I appreciated the questions. We did have some back and forth, which I think is great as a sign of things to come in terms of the data that we are going to work with you all to research. We have started that process, so I will talk a little bit about it. I don't really have a presentation just yet because this is just meant to be a bit of a kickoff, but I do want to talk through our scope and obviously available for a dialogue or a set of questions. But I can talk through our scope just to give you further insight into what we're planning on doing, and then actually talk through very high-level working draft research that we've already started. It's not so much the numbers or the information that I necessarily want to provide, but I want to talk about some of the metrics and the way we might look at things, which hopefully will enlighten this process of a real estate market analysis. So just by starting off, being here today obviously is kind of a very early step one. After this meeting, I plan to drive around the city a bit, but we will be coming back, and what we'd like to do as early March is get into a set of one-on-one meetings with you all. And the goal there would be to get from you all some feedback, very specific feedback, and not in a Brown Act circumstance, by the way, because now you can't email each other about what you said to us, right? I've learned a little bit this morning. I have no tests for you. There's no Brown Act tests after this. But what we'd like to do is talk to you on a one-on-one basis. And the goal there is for us to get a sense of what we typically look at is, hey, what are the strengths and weaknesses? What are the strengths and challenges? What are the opportunities in the city of Foster City? So it helps us get educated as part of stakeholder outreach and as part of our own education process. Ultimately, we'll come back and share a report with you in 6 to 8 months. But I think that's a very important step so that you all can tell us a thing or two about your city. And ideally, we'd like to do that in the next 30 days. In the meantime, we're going to continue doing our due diligence, demographic and market research. So that's all part of task one. Task two is very specific real estate, economic, and market assessment, and it's all the data collection I've inferred. Developing a baseline inventory of existing properties, obviously working with staff. I appreciate the notion that Sophie mentioned about has there been absorption for certain spaces, and we want to track that and understand that progress, if you will. Key market indicators like vacancy, lease rates, et cetera, identify some constraints, unmet demand, and maybe some benchmarks for relative comparative communities, cities, and/or the county. And then we also plan to use a resource, and there was a question during our contract, which was what types of resources will we use? We will use Esri for the demographics. We've already done that. We're going to use CoStar for a lot of the market information. We will use Placer AI, which is a mobile data analytic platform that really gives us information about real-time patterns. And those patterns are where are people coming from, where are they going, how long are they staying, even what are their demographics. So we can get a feel for who's coming into the city, who's leaving the city, why and for how long, which helps inform potentially some strategies and/or demand for opportunity sites if we know that there's a particular pattern that we can maybe take advantage of. So Placer AI will be something we use, and that'll be part of our data collection, which will also help us define a trade area. Demographic and psychographic analysis, again, using the program Esri, that'll be our main resource for that. And understanding consumer needs, spending behavior, types of demographics, and then stakeholder and community outreach. You know, when we come up for several in-person meetings, one of which is going to want to not just speak with you all, but also try to get in touch with community members, if you will, in an efficient form, but also stakeholders, businesses, local brokers, et cetera, to help us get educated. So there's stakeholder and community engagement, which we'll embark upon. And then identifying future needs, and that's related to really trends. You know, what are the trends today? I think we have a sense for what those trends are, but we've been working, Cosmont Companies has been working across California for 40 years. And as we see certain trends in us working with cities on economic development and market research, if you will, and economic development tools, we want to share that with you all. And if that can inure to your benefit, not all those tools work for every single community. Your community is unique. But I think if we can bring some of those trends to enlighten this process, we plan to do that. So that's identifying future economic needs. Assessing opportunity sites. You know, you've got underutilized real estate. I did drive by as I came into town this morning. Obviously, the major retail center on the 92, but there's also a vacant parcel that's looks like a great location. You know, your Costco is there, which the other question is, how well is Costco doing? And you know, how do we figure out to make sure Costco sticks around, because they're a very valuable retailer and a valuable asset to your community and valuable to your general fund, if you will. So, you know, understanding all those things is important, because I think it's not just assessing opportunities and trying to think about business attraction, but it's also business retention. It is an important component when we may go out and think about attracting new businesses, but we also need to make sure we're keeping the current businesses that are here happy. And we want to look into a little bit of your infrastructure as well, so we'll do some interviews accordingly internally. City council updates. So we'll be back 4 or 5 times, including the final presentation, and with meetings like this, if you will, but it'll be generally updates. And it'll be updates on where we are with information, market information, and then some of the stakeholder outreach and what we've heard. So you'll have progress update meetings. And then ultimately, there'll be an action plan or a final report that we'll provide, as I said, maybe sometime around August. It'd be great if we're back here in March and maybe back in May or June, and then ultimately back in August or September to finalize this baseline real estate market study. So I don't know if you have any questions there. I want to go through high level the types of information that we've began to gather, and just share with you kind of some things to come in terms of our data collection. You know, it's real data. It's just that we're not in a position to necessarily share it just yet. Questions, sir?
Stacy?
Yes.
Yeah, more just a suggestion. When you come back to do the one-on-ones with us, would it be possible also to include our planning commission as well? Because I think those
particular members of our body are kind of more in the weeds with a lot of our planning and housing. So if that's possible.
We can work on scheduling and coordinating that.
Okay, I think that'd be great.
And when I say one-on-ones, I mean, as you know, the other format, of course, is two-on-ones, if you will. So we've typically done two-on-ones, right? So that we don't violate our favorite law. I won't say it because you guys heard about it for an hour. But to be clear, that if we do end up in a situation where there's some efficiencies, it can be 5 meetings, it could be 3 meetings from council's perspective. And then with planning commissioners, the other thing to do, keeping in mind, is if we're here and we can have in-person meetings and not everybody is necessarily available, we can do follow-up virtual meetings to do those interviews at a convenient time.
That'd be great. Just however you want to do that. I think just getting their input would be helpful.
Okay?
Can I have a question, or
Yes.
maybe it's
Hang on.
Oh, sorry.
You done? Okay, I was going to move. Patrick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Phoebe, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Ken, for joining us today. I alluded to this, I think, when you came last time on Zoom, but I just want to make sure, and you already may have this baked into your plan, when you're doing these like stakeholder UX interviews, that we're including businesses, a pretty wide range of businesses, right? We have Gilead here, that's fantastic. We have the mom and pop, brick and mortars. We also have some companies like Replit, for example, is here. They're an AI company. They're $3 billion unicorn, and their CEO has expressed that he wants Foster City to be, and his company to be like Mountain View and Google, Cupertino and Apple. So I want to make sure either he or someone on his team, chief of staff, get to talk to you, because I want to make sure that voice is represented.
Yeah, very good, thank you. And we want those stakeholder names by all means, because we want to put together a list that, is comprehensive enough.
Patrick?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. As mentioned before in an earlier statement, I am a commercial broker for over 30 years. One of the things is in Foster City, the uniqueness is we have as many people coming into Foster City as leaving in the morning. One adjective that I haven't heard you, how do we make Foster City a destination? The discussion for the last 30 years is we've been identified as water and sports and stuff like that, but we haven't done with destination. And then the other thing is part of your, I think you did mention it in your earlier report, we have a transportation issue of a couple of miles to get to public transportation and train. So we have a little bit of a gridlock of a lot of people traffic-wise getting in and out of Foster City because they can't get to public transportation or they can't get to the train. So if we can somehow encompasses that, and I use the example of what BART is doing with Uber. BART is doing with Uber is giving little cards out to get them to the train faster. So we need some kind of, we're one of the first planned cities in the United States, and we need to plan. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay,
Okay,
there is
Susie.
go ahead, please.
Sorry, my question kind of goes along with traffic and the fact that you had already mentioned that this is a unique city. And you're going to do a little tour around Foster City. I encourage you to also try to get to Foster City at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Actually take that drive to find out how difficult it is. Because I think that will bring another understanding to traffic patterns and how things might work in Foster City. So just that, thank you.
Which brings up, we may need to do another traffic study at some point along the way here. When was the last time we did an EIR for that had level of service?
Will Placer AI be able to shed some light on information around traffic and those kinds of things that will help us? Because, traffic is not always negative, right? Because we're all traffic, we cause it, but traffic also means that people are wanting to come and make money here, build businesses, take advantage of our businesses, so.
Placer can add value to the different traffic metrics. Potentially, it's not a traffic model, but it does and can tell us at what time of day are people, traveling, and what are they doing, and when are they coming in to shop. The comment about, yes, as many people come into the city as they leave, and I have that number. So that means you have a major job base, but you've also got a lot of folks commuting out. So we can look to placer to identify some of those traffic patterns.
And I'd like to finish my question.
Mayor Kiesel, you asked a question about a traffic study.
Yeah,
The last time we did a major traffic study was when we did the multi-project traffic impact analysis, when we had 5 big major development projects all happening at the same time. Since then, we've done studies project by project basis based on development projects. And I think LOS is no longer an EIR or a CEQA standard. So the next time we look at LOS would be as part of our land use and circulation element update.
wow, okay. My secondary question, you mentioned updates. If during an update you come with some information, you've got a plan of attack, and you come with some information that is going to put us in a position we're going to have to say, we're going to have to shift a little bit, okay, and focus a little bit differently. How much flexibility do we have?
In terms of the information that gets provided?
Not so much the information, it's the direction or the focus. You spend more time on a specific set of information, and this is not very important. In other words, we modify it some way down the road,
I think
if the need be.
I think there's flexibility. I think inherent in the periodic updates, probably it comes with a little bit of direction. I mean, I don't want to just show up and tell you what we learned and then come back again and do the same thing per se. There's going to be a dialogue at the end of the day. And maybe there's additional research of some sort that keeps us within an efficient solution, but a direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Mayor Kiesel, if I may add, and one of the reasons we actually added those updates to City Council was so that we are aware that we are on the right track, and if, as per your direction, we have to pivot a little bit, there is a scope for that.
Saying it for the record. Patrick.
Yeah, I would encourage you to look at the east-west situation, and that's the mobility of getting people from the east to the west without a vehicle. I mean, if we were thinking outside of the box, a gondolin in Foster City to get us to the west side, vice versa, we could get economic development from people in San Mateo or the peninsula that can get in. As you know, with people on 101, they're not going more than 30 miles either direction. So they really don't, but there's a disconnect between east and west.
Okay, any more? Okay, continue, please.
Sure. Again, examples of the type of data. And I'm staring at this high-level, work in progress. But what's important is to understand the tax revenues, and there are at least 3 main categories for the tax revenues that kind of define economic development in our estimation: property tax, sales tax, hotel tax. They directly tie to different asset classes, of course. And so it's that type of info that I think becomes important, because we have all the cities of California identified that way into some averages. And I'd like to know how a city like Foster City compares. It's a pretty low sales tax. Generally speaking, it's a pretty low sales tax component. It's not an unreasonable hotel tax component from what we can tell, and it's probably a pretty high property tax component. So, I mean, I think we all sort of know that, but how does that inform us in land use? Because if you're at a lower sales tax component, again, can we drive retail sales or not? And then we have history of those revenues, 10-year histories. of both the property, of all the property sales and hotel tax, as well as for the county, as well as for the entire state. And then we have that graphically. The other important component tends to be what's called a county pool. And that is, as people shop online, the sales tax dollars goes into a county pool and it gets spread. If you have a low footprint of retail or a low revenue generation, unfortunately, you don't get the greater of that share. You get an allocation. But it is relevant because we've been shopping online here for the last 15, 20 years, and it's made quite a difference on brick and mortar and direct sales tax revenues to many different cities. And we have categorically the retail areas and how they do within the city. We have demographics that do a comparison between city, county, state, and we can make a comparison as well to other cities. Home values and the history of that, unemployment and the history of that. There was a comment made about people coming into work and leaving to work. So right now our numbers show about 19,000 folks coming into work every day and about 17,000 leaving. So big job base, big daytime population because there's some major employers here, but folks are also leaving to go to other industries for their job purposes. And then that translates to what we call a jobs housing balance. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into our homework. The other area of research is the different asset market overviews. So retail, again, relatively small footprint. San Mateo County's got 30 million square feet of retail. Foster City has, less than 1 million square feet of retail. And so understanding that as well as vacancies. So that becomes relevant, is that how do those vacancies get filled? And is there information that we can gather that might help advance that cause? We have a history of retail vacancies and rents going back for 10 years. So I think we would welcome further analyzing that and sharing it. So that's retail. Office. Office is an asset class, same thing. Right now, we find that you got about 4 million square feet out of 60 million square feet in the county. And what does that vacancy look like? And why? And what's happening in that market condition with life sciences and tech being in high demand in this area? And how does that translate to what exists in this city? And so we've got that information, again, at a pretty high level. We've got a history of it for office, including vacancy, rents, inventory, et cetera. So that's the type of information that I think we'll be gathering as well. I mean, that's not the only thing we're going to be doing. That's a few dozen slides of information. When we make presentations, we like to put it in a digestible form, ideally, so that's why we use PowerPoint, but this is data-rich PowerPoint information, again, to try to establish a baseline for you all, and a strategic viewpoint for where to go next. Because as I might have said before, I say it all the time, data is one thing, but you got to answer the question, so what? And then you got to answer the question, now what? So we'd like to answer those questions for you.
Patrick?
You've got a challenge before you, and I'm going to kind of put you in a scenario and see how you would approach it. We have commercial buildings that are vacant, and obviously they're vacant because the landlords are not really necessarily encouraging to rent them, and they have investors. And that building may be in a portfolio of 5 or 6 other commercial buildings, and they only want a certain rate of return. So how do you overcome the obstacle of a building like an IBM building or an underutilized building like a Visa building? And we have several of those, and I like the word economic development. The only thing I didn't like hearing is, how we do our taxation for economic development. Economic development is meaning developing an opportunity for more revenue. And cities obviously think property tax, sales tax, TOT tax. So how can you encourage those buildings that we have several? And I'd be willing to meet with you and help you with that.
It's a great question, and one of the tougher tasks, because we deal with all kinds of cities, economic strategies and market evaluations and opportunity side evaluations. And our company is in the middle of public-private deals. How did we get to that point? You know, at the end of the day, both parties have to have some motivation, both meaning both the public and the private sector. Getting the private sector to necessarily be motivated is a challenge when, if they're sitting, if it's in a portfolio, if it's in a trust, if it's not part of their daily living needs, you know, it becomes maybe a passive investment. So it is a challenge, but we do look at certain tools, and some of those tools include maybe a density proposition or an infrastructure proposition or a value capture proposition. And we try to apply those in our strategies. You can bring a horse to water, you can't make him drink it. But if we try to evaluate at least where the motivation is coming from or the lack thereof, at least we can identify the potential of movement. If you do nothing, it's probably not a very good plan. If you try to create some tools and incentives, it could be a good plan.
Okay, anybody else? Continue.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to drive around. It's not 4 o'clock. So I won't hit the same traffic pattern.
You can take the gondola.
But I can't wait to be here around 4 o'clock next time.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, I think that's the end of the formal presentation. I think at this point, we're looking for, I think, the ideas. We're hearing some of the concerns. You've asked some questions. We're open for a discussion now, if you'd like, about what has been presented, if there are some additional things that you'd like to see, if you've got questions about anything that's going on, whether it's process, whether it's data, those types of things. We're here to answer those questions and receive direction from the council.
Susie?
So you mentioned public-private partnerships. One thing that I'm very interested in is the city buying a piece of property and then it being leased to a business to generate more revenue, to create another revenue stream for the city. Do you have experience in that, to identifying what a good property might be for the city?
Yeah, I want to make sure I repeat your question. It's the notion of the city taking control of certain property, right? And then getting itself into a public-private deal to help the private sector. That notion is a good one. Today's hurdle is something called the Surplus Land Act. And unfortunately, I could sit for an hour, like on the topic of the Brown Act, and talk about Surplus Land Act, which is legislation that's been around for a long time, but it's been amended of late, where the state requires cities, public agencies, public entities to first offer property to affordable housing developers. And the Surplus Land Act, SLA, is something that is a step in the process. If the goal is for a city that owns real estate, or a county, if you will, to achieve affordable housing, well, you have a heck of an opportunity to do so, and you'd be making HCD happy, notwithstanding RENA requirements, which obviously are significant these days. And we're going to be getting ourselves into the 7th cycle before you know it. So housing is, the priority that's coming out of the state. So how do we enter into a public-private deal with city-owned property, either without first going through that process, understanding the opportunity of that site to be affordable housing, or maybe you have already gone through the Surplus Land Act, which many of our city clients, as we work with them on their assets, they've either gone through it, they haven't gone through it, but they'd like to go through it and get to the other side, or they have a different strategy, which is to not necessarily leverage that. Is there an opportunity to work with the private sector based on property that you control as a city? Yes, there is. It's an asset strategy. It's very important for us to understand that it shouldn't be ignored. It just needs to be addressed in a compliant fashion.
Stacy?
So I had just sort of a question around what the end result is going to look like. Is it going to be simply a report saying, here's where we think the commercial sector should look like, or here's the highest and best use of these particular vacant pieces of property? Or is it maybe something that's more high level? I guess, like, what does that look like? And I think my concerns with that specifically are, while we can look at ways that we as a city can, bring in more revenue and enhance our tax base and all of that, I would also like to see this be, what do the residents want, right? So, for example, we hear all the time, we don't have a white tablecloth restaurant in Foster City. Is that something that you would be looking at and going, because it's not feasible? So I guess, what is the final end product going to look like, and what's the roadmap for us?
Well, it is a combination of things you mentioned. I mean, I think all the information we're going to gather, again, is going to tell us some story. I think we'd like to then translate that for you all. It may be intuitive, it may not be intuitive. So ideally is if you have information that's kind of on a micro level, you have some opportunity sites, which we will look at. You have some input from the community on desires and demands and et cetera, things that are missing. And then we can kind of triangulate that to say, okay, here are some opportunities for you all, and here might be a way to go. Coupled with all that is obviously the reality of the market conditions. So there's certain trends. Are white tablecloth restaurants expanding or not expanding? Are they looking to be in certain parts of the Bay Area or not? What is the trend today? Because that's the other thing that needs to be juxtaposed is we oftentimes look at, here's a sector that's really growing. And if that matches those other components, what the city wants, what the city needs, what the community wants and what they need, then we can try to put that into a document that says, hey, this is an area to potentially go and pursue. If it doesn't match, we need to be honest about what's going on in that triangulation of information. So hopefully that's what we're going to end up. It's not a strategic plan, but I hope that it enlightens you all to say, hey, here's some things we can go do next, ideally.
And I think in that, so I'll give an example. Like, we have our Metro Center, which is our Safeway complex. It's just around the corner, essentially. I hear all the time that that's an underutilized piece of property. It's, got these gorgeous lagoon views, but the lagoon is facing the parking lot. Is that something where you would look at that space and go, you know what, I really think we could, you could maximize and get more people out and make this more beautiful space if we were to flip it or do something else with this piece of property? Is that the type of analysis that you will be doing?
Yes, it is, because, and again, some of that may be intuitive to you all because you see it every day, you live here every day, the community will tell us that, so I don't also want to err on the side of, stating the blatantly obvious, but I think there's nothing wrong with us independently, professionally, with a lot of experience, trying to come in and maybe share some of those ideas, and maybe have you thought about this, can you do that? Is there a redevelopment play? Yes, the property owners at the end of the day have a lot to say with things, whether things get redeveloped, but if there's a value proposition and we can see it, because we run financial models all day long. And so if we can kind of look at that at a high level and say, there might be a proposition to a property owner to actually make more money than they're currently making based on X, Y, and Z, yes, that's part of the opportunity site assessment from our end.
And I just think my last plug would be just, if at all possible, I really think, to me, history is important, and remembering, sort of the roots of what Foster City is about, right? Or this bedroom community, very family focused, very family oriented. And so as we go through all our different analysis, I'm hoping that we're not looking at how can we get a Walmart here, right? Like that's kind of important, I think, to many of us, so.
Yeah.
Hey, Bibi? Yeah. I have either the fortune or misfortune to have been part of a study that was done in 2013. I want to make sure that we are not taking a solution and looking for a problem. I'm very critical of that approach, and I'm not suggesting that you're doing that. Okay, I'd like to see the data first. And what's real, what you see. Okay, and then obviously we'll make those decisions, but I don't want to, we're going to have this great Taj Mahal. Now let's find a place to put it. I don't want to see us go there because it just doesn't work. So.
Thank you, Mayor Kiesel. I did get my thoughts back. In my past, I've been a consultant, very different industry, but I always made sure to include ideas that were very tangible, reachable, right, pragmatic. Also some that are middle of the road with a little bit more investment or focus we can get to. And then I really also want to see some audacious ideas, ones that I might just say, what? I really want to see that as well. That shouldn't be the majority of the plan, obviously, or the report, but I'd like to see things that will maybe be riskier, because I want to understand where we could be going, right? That doesn't mean we have to take on those ideas, but I want to be able to see the whole landscape. And then addressing some of the constraints that my council member and we have all brought up around traffic, around, the fact that we don't have a traditional downtown. I want to also see some creative thinking around how do we make those constraints beautiful for Foster City while acknowledging they exist. Now what? Because we're not suddenly going to build a downtown, but there are other things we could be doing. So I'd like for this report, when it's delivered, this will help us align as a council and a team and a staff team so that when we're talking to people, we're not saying that constraints don't exist, but we're focused on singing from the same hymn sheet, is that the right metaphor, on what we could be doing, what is possible versus dwelling on, these are all the things that make it so hard. Because I think people have heard that for a while, and we need to be able to move on.
I want to kind of talk about the economic development. Foster City has the unique thing, we own 22 units. And the rate of return on it would be something I would like you to dearly look at. You mentioned about housing. That's 22 units that we're not collecting property tax on because we own it. For the development of that, would possibly be looking at how can we do a lottery? How can we encourage all cities surrounding this San Mateo County and probably across the country are hurting for employees. It's hard to keep employees. And I'd like to see in your thought process, how can we keep longevity of people in the city? And when I dovetail into that, I made the same comment to you on the last meeting that we had in the council meeting. Mixed use situation is a reality. We are a planned city, so I want you to think outside of the box and how do we create our housing and how can we have home ownership at a reasonable level so people want to stay here and raise their families.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Okay. I'm looking forward to the one-on-one or the one-on-two, whatever it happens to be. Luck of the draw, right? No, I'm looking forward to that because there's just a lot of history that I'd like to partake and share. So, okay, good. Any more comments?
Thank you, Mayor. We do have 2-3 minutes. I don't know if you want me to share some of the vacancies that we did fill in 2025 as an update.
Go ahead. You're within your allotted time.
So thank you. So what you see on your screen on the left is some of the information that I included in my slides last year. So you do see some of the vacancies, which was basically more from the LoopNet that I included last year. On to the right, it is basically all those 2026 like updates that I'm providing today in terms of the vacancies that we were able to fill. For Parkside Towers, we were talking about a very high vacancy rate, which was 40%, but I do want to note that we did make some, progress in that. We all know that, as Councilmember Venkat pointed out, that Replit is one of our new tenants in Foster City who moved their headquarters from San Francisco to Foster City. They currently occupy one floor in the building. Very recently, a building staff has approved Zuora. It's a new tenant that's going to occupy approximately 33,000 square feet in the building. And last Friday, I had additional conversation that an existing tenant is looking into adding more square footage, which is about 68,000 square feet in Parkside Towers. So definitely, as you can see, that vacancy rate is going to go down. So, and it is one of our prime office building locations. Edgewater Shopping Center, we all, again, few years we have been struggling with filling the vacancies, but I do want to note, just with Osaka coming to that, shopping center, I've heard from the property managers that they're getting a lot of traction. You all were there for the Osaka Marketplace grand opening, and again, it's a huge success. And in addition to Osaka, there are few more tenants that are already, they are either in their tenant improvement stage. We have Sana Cafe, we have a nail salon, and a recently opened Bangalore Utri, which is an Indian restaurant. As I talked to the property managers, there are 6 leases that are already under negotiations. So again, I think we are seeing that this shopping center is making quite a few, it is making progress. We're also going back to planning commission because, now with all these new tenants, there is need for signage. So, the property manager wants to revamp their master sign program so that, people are aware of the new tenants that are in the shopping center. Moving on to Lincoln Center, again, as I said, it comprises of various buildings. Some of the buildings have already been completed, which you can see on to your right, building 200, 300, 400, and 500. Last year, we talked about a major vacancy in Lincoln Center. Zoox did occupy 200 and 300 Lincoln Center in last year, and there's another tenant that is occupying Lincoln Center, again bringing its vacancy down. 391 Foster City Boulevard, it's a small warehouse building, about 21,000 square feet, that has been vacant for quite a few years. In recent times, we did get few queries regarding the use of this building for some recreation purposes, but somehow those did not go through. But now, again, another existing Foster City tenant is looking into leasing the entire building. So I think that will be finalized in a month or so. So I'm hoping that will be fully occupied as well.
And that's an expansion, not a relocation for that existing, so.
Yes. Oh, thank you. In terms of Foster Square, I know, we all are aware of some of the challenges that Foster Square is facing. And last year, there was only one new tenant, which was Toast in Town, but of course, it's doing great. And currently, we have 2 vacancies. One is La Bella, which has actually, instead of closing the business, it has moved to Edgewater Shopping Center. And the other one is Gobi Mongolian Green, that is currently vacant. So these are 2 vacancies. We also talked about 2 small office buildings, 919 and 989 East Hillsdale Boulevard. Last year, we were able to house a new use to Foster City, which is a nursing school. This went through a planning commission approval of securing what is considered as unique use. And Samuel Merritt University, the work is all complete. And I think this week or next week, the students will start using this space. And lastly, we have two other sites that we discussed. One is Chess Hatch. As City Council is aware, we did bring this item as a preliminary review to City Council last year. It's currently under entitlements for about 800,000 square feet of R&D. It's basically changing the use from office R&D to R&D only. So far, we have had 2 Planning Commission study sessions, and we are hoping that this item will be brought to City Council for approval sometime in May. Regarding 1010 Metro Center, yes, we continue to get queries, but as of today, we do not have any formal application for the site. I think that's it for the presentation, and if you have any questions.
Mayor Keys?
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia, for the report on the fly. I just have a couple questions. One is, great to hear that Zora is coming back, because they were in Foster City. And if we could have any details, you don't have to supply them now. Great story of them coming back, right? So if there's a way we can like tap into that and promote that. And then in terms of what is this? 391 Foster City Boulevard, it sounds great that there is going to be an expansion there and relocation. Do we understand why the proposed rec purpose didn't go through?
So when we got the application at that time, it was driven by the applicant, not the property owner. And as the applicant was getting these approvals, the property owner did not want to get tied to that applicant. So that somehow, I think, even though we knew that that is something, a use that I think Planning Commission was supportive of, but I think the property owner did not want to get tied to that specific applicant for 5 years or something like that.
All right, thank you.
Patrick?
Yeah, thanks, Sophia, for a report. And my question is tied kind of like on our tour that we had at Gilead's. Of the ones that you explained, how many of them and you may need to develop, or actually have transportation, shuttle buses back and forth to work? Because a lot of the people that do come to work here in Foster City live in the East Bay, or they live other places. So and the reason why I'm thinking about it is for the consultant here, that if we have more forms of public transportation like Gilead's has, or maybe IBM did at one point, it might be a good tool for marketing for somebody wanting to work and play in Foster City.
Thank you, Councilmember Sullivan, for that question. Gilead has a very robust shuttle program, and for this particular project, Chess Hatch, the TDM program is under review, and that is something that will be presented to Planning Commission. I do not have the details yet, but Chess Hatch also has to comply with the TDM program, and the shuttle program is a very much part of that program.
And just to add on, Lincoln Center campus, Illumina, also has a TDM program, as well as Parkside Towers.
Okay, thank you.
Down here? Susie? Okay, we're good. Stefan?
Okay, so next on the plan is a discussion on committees, commissions, the selection process for those, as well as a discussion towards the end on proclamation policy, council proclamations. And so we'll give, do you need a few minutes to get set up? Okay, Priscilla's going to lead that discussion, and that discussion will take us into lunch here in about an hour.
Okay.
All right, so we will go over the committees and proclamation policy. First, we have the Citizen Advisory Committees. So the goal for today is to have council review its 6 commission and committees and assess whether the committees align with council priorities and their effectiveness, and whether any should be disbanded. We'll also review the interview and appointment process to see if it can be more efficient. So we'll go over the committees briefly first. So first, we have the Planning Commission. Their powers and duties are governed by the planning and zoning law of the state and the municipal code, and it's required by law. It has 5 members, so we're not requesting any changes. For the audit committee, they advise the city council on the selection of independent auditors, the review of the annual audit process and financial statements, and other financial matters as requested by the council. So this committee has 5 members, and the staff time required per year to administer this is about 40 to 44 hours per year, and that's for 2 meetings. It should be noted that the staff liaison mentioned that the committee members' attendance in the last 3 calendar years, they've never had a full attendance at their meetings. So at least one committee has been absent every meeting. And they also mentioned that no member of the public has been present at the meeting, either in person or via Zoom. That goes to say that's attending the meeting during the time of, but the public could potentially watch the meeting online, and that's not recorded. Next, we have the Citizen Sustainability Advisory Committee. That committee has 7 members, and they advise the council on sustainability issues, research, review, and provide comments on city programs and initiatives, and assist the city in implementing the Climate Action Plan. So this requires about 267 hours per year, and it should be noted that this committee meets monthly, but they also hold a number of events. So for example, Clean Air Day, and then also the Earth Day Fair. And then we have the Parks and Recreation Committee. This committee has 7 members, and they support the priorities of the Parks and Recreation Department. They serve as ambassadors and volunteers and promote parks and recreation services and programs, and they act as the voice of citizen interests. So this committee meets monthly, and staff time required is about 77 to 88 hours per year. Traffic Review Committee. So this committee is a technical review committee on traffic. They receive appeals and requests from citizens or staff regarding traffic matters and make recommendations to the council. It should be noted that any changes to this committee would need to be made via the municipal code and ordinance updates. This committee is a little bit different in that while it does have 7 members, 5 of those members are staff, and so that's reflected in the amount of staff hours that's noted, 100 hours per year. And while they meet, the meeting schedule is monthly, they have about 5 meetings per year. And then lastly, we have the Youth Advisory Committee. So they advise and respond to the City Council in all matters related to the needs of the youth in Foster City, and they promote teen involvement in the community. And so this committee has 15 members. They meet monthly during the school year, so September through June, and then the staff time required is about 85 to 90 hours per year. And then we also have the staff liaisons here if you have any questions regarding the staff time. Okay, so now we'll go over the current committee appointment process. So currently, applicants will fill out the application online on NetFile, and then they're invited to a regular meeting. Applicants are then interviewed by the full council and have 3 minutes to answer the set questions. The council can then ask applicants follow-up questions, and then there's a roll call vote process to appoint members. There's no time limit per applicant, nor on the number of questions that council may ask. But with this process, sometimes we are spending more than 10 minutes per applicant during the interview process, and when we have the end-of-year recruitment that typically has more applicants, it does take significant time. Next, we'll go over the options. So option 1 is that we do not change the current process and we keep the current interview and appointment process, and applicants are continued to be interviewed by the full council at a regular meeting. Option 2, the council could choose to form a 2-member subcommittee that interviews all of the applicants and then makes a recommendation to the full city council. The council could appoint 2 members to the subcommittee, which would be added via the council liaison list. They could either have one subcommittee that interviews all committees and applicants, or they could have, this would be a little bit more complicated, but they could have a different subcommittee for each advisory committee. And for example, that could include the council liaison and one other council member. After the interviews, the recommended appointees would then attend a regular council meeting with a scheduled appointment, and they would introduce themselves to the full council. It should be noted that the city attorney mentioned if the council liaison is not on the subcommittee, we need to be careful not to discuss the interview process with them because of the Brown Act. And so this option would be more efficient use of the council meeting time and then potentially less pressure on the applicants. Option 3, we have hold a special meeting in the EOC with the full city council for interviews. This meeting would still need to be televised and recorded, but it would be a more informal environment. By having a separate meeting, the council would not be pressed for time on the other agenda items. This option would take more time and administrative work, and it would take 2 meetings in order to appoint members to the committees. Option 4 is update the application process. So we could change the open-ended application question from please state the reasons and objectives for desiring to become a member of the committee to please state how your relevant skills, experience, and collaborative mindset make you a qualified member for the committee. Or we could have council members submit their written questions, 1 per council member, to the applicants, and then the applicants would provide their answers via email prior to the appointment meeting. This would shorten the time spent on interviews during the meeting because we would not allow follow-up questions at the meeting. And the city clerk would coordinate getting the responses. Other considerations, we could also limit 1 follow-up question per council member at the interviews if we hold it at a regular meeting, or we could limit the applicant to 45 seconds per follow-up question. So there would be a timer on their initial interview and then a timer used for each follow-up question. So that concludes my presentation for the committee portion, and the policy questions we have for the council are, does the city council want to continue with all citizen advisory committees or evaluate whether any can be disbanded? Does the city council choose to move forward with option 1, no change, option 2, option 3, or option 4 for the committee appointment process? And does the council want to impose any limits on follow-up questions?
Who wants to start with this?
Yes, sir. So what we're looking for is some direction. Staff wants to be very careful that we're not dictating change. We've gotten some feedback, I think, over the course of the last several years about this. We've certainly provided some feedback as well. But we'd like the council to kind of take a look at these 2 questions here and give some direction to the staff, and then we can certainly adjust the policies or any ordinances that need to be adjusted accordingly based on your direction.
Who wants to start?
Well, are we starting with the committees themselves or the process? There's 2 different.
Both.
Well, so I actually had some questions for Vanessa, but I don't see her here. I'm just wondering, if we go back a few slides, why, it seems like that's quite a bit out of 267 hours per year is significantly more than any of the other committees, and I'm just wondering if there's...
Yeah, and I'll defer that to Sophia, who Vanessa reports to Sophia, and we'll let her respond to that.
Remember for that question. So CSAC is the one that is commissioned with implementing climate action plan. So that's why a lot of work goes into, because there are quite a few tasks that is outlined. We have some numbers in terms of our GHG, greenhouse gas inventory, that we need to meet by 2030. So, when CSAC meets, right, they do talk about those implementation tasks. Last year, there was this work on the Foster City Guide. That was basically all, CSAC does all these discussions and they bring to the table, and then it's Vanessa's task. She's tasked with kind of putting it all together. So that is one of them, like Foster City Guide that was put together last year. Then there were these, I'm trying to remember some of the tasks, those social marketing pilot programs that again CSAC undertook. But again, even if it is CSAC that is tasked with it, because it is under city's purview, we still have to make sure that it is something that goes through the city's process. So everything is vetted through staff before it goes to the residents.
So without this CSAC committee, there are still a number of tasks and things that must be done in order to fulfill our
Climate action.
climate action plan.
Yes.
So without them, then, I mean, I guess my question is, does this committee take work from staff, or is it adding to staff? I mean, does that make sense?
Yes, I would say it's both ways. They definitely bring in a lot of ideas, but as I said, again, even if they bring in some ideas, we have to make sure that we vet them through the city's process. For example, I'm just giving an example of a Foster City Guide, right? We make sure that even if some of the ideas they bring is something as per state law, right? Do we want to include it in a guide like that? Is it something that city is advocating for? For example, if they are talking about electrification, we know we have some challenges regarding electrification. We cannot commit to doing anything related to building code because now AB 130 limits our ability. So again, I know they always bring these ideas, but then we have to vet through city's process and state laws for that. So yes, I would say they do bring in a lot of great ideas, and yes, it is work for staff to make sure that those ideas align with city's process.
If I can kind of respond, I've noticed that too when I look through this, and each department is reporting those hours based on their evaluation of how that works. I think that there's probably a lot, when I take a look at the CSAC, because I had the same question, a lot of the work is counted in both, and you already said it. A lot of the CSAC work, it's work that would have to be done otherwise, and so that number is probably a little inflated when you're only trying to consider what is the load being created by a committee on staff. And so the 267 hours, I think if we were to go back and ask Vanessa to just cite only the stuff that is based on the CSAC, this other stuff you're already doing. So don't count that as CSAC stuff. What's the additional work hour load that's being created because of that? And I think you'll see that number go significantly down. When I take a look at the other committees, those are probably pretty accurate. Those are. The CSAC one, I think, is a little inflated.
And if I can just add, CSAC is also one of the few committees that takes part in a lot of events, such as the Earth Day event, which requires a lot of hours working with staff to coordinate that. And I don't know how many such events they put up, but the Earth Day is a big one that I can think of.
And just to add, last year there was Earth Day, Summer Days, and even the Peninsula Clean Air event that was conducted. So again, I think, yes. And I think a lot of preparation goes into just making sure that the events are in align with a climate action plan and CSAC. So staff does have to work with committee.
So I have one more. I don't want to hog, so I can come back. But okay. So I have a question for Director Schweigart. The Park and Rec Committee. What would you say is the most value add for this committee?
Great. I think the main value for Parks and Rec is that it's an ongoing sort of standing focus group, if you will. So we don't necessarily get, with the exception of like the community garden, which was a big win for Foster City, and that really came out of the Parks and Rec Committee and came out from members who were sort of passionate about that project. The committee doesn't necessarily derive issues or particular projects. However, for us as staff, we will tend to use the committee to vet certain ideas or projects. So obviously, in recent years, as you know, we've been really busy with the community center, we've been busy with the Parks Master Plan, and so they have been sort of an ongoing standing kind of focus group that we can use to vet many things. So we also use the committee to get some ideas bouncing off. These are residents that are in the community, you know, and so we use that as an opportunity to vet ideas. So if we're pitching a program such as the utility box art program, we will bring them in. They may even help us judge art. They may give us some guidance on how to promote the activity. So really that's primary focus of how it's being used. We always do redirect them so that if there is a priority for the council that is related to Parks and Rec, then that will always sort of take precedent, and that might even drive our work plan. But generally speaking, it's a lot of things that may be already going on, and we use them sort of as a focus group.
And would it be more streamlined or maybe more effective if this group was maybe like an ad hoc committee that came in as needed instead of scheduled every month? Or is it just more efficient to have this monthly date?
I will admit that staff does spend a lot of time, in fact, I'm looking at it right now, we develop a calendar, we look at it a year in advance, and we really plan out various subjects or topics that are either of interest to the committee or of interest to the department in the city, whether the priorities or what have you. We take a look at those and we will plan out the agenda. There are sometimes we don't really have a lot, it's light, the agendas are light, while sometimes we have topics that will take up a whole meeting. So it really varies. The tough thing about scheduling an ad hoc, I mean, if we didn't have this committee, we could have done an ad hoc committee such for the Parks Master Plan or for the community center. But then we would not be tackling any other particular topics that are out there whereby this committee could use. And it's really hard to pull in volunteers who are committing on a regular basis to be in attendance and so forth. So like even when we did the Parks Master Plan, we had I wouldn't call it, we didn't have a steering committee, but we had the main advisory committee or what have you. We had to go do a recruitment. It was tough to do. And then participation was, you know, half the time, like we have like a third of the people not even attend. And so it can be a challenge.
Okay, so I have some thoughts later, but I'll hold for now.
Okay, Susie?
I kind of have a similar question for Mr. Cruz about the audit committee. It's also a question that I want to ask council. And I think I've asked this question before when we interviewed other candidates for being on the committee. And what is the value added both to the department and what is the value added to council? I heard Priscilla say, well, and I'm the liaison, and so I know the last two meetings, the two meetings for 2025, I think we had to sit and wait for somebody to come to have a quorum. And not everybody, there's at least one absent, two absent. And the purpose of the committee is to help the selection of the auditor and review the ACFR. I have a concern that if you don't have certain skills as an accountant, you're not going to understand that. And it takes, I think, more staff time and more time of the auditor to explain that. I've also heard some applicants say, well, I want to learn about finance. I think there's other avenues to learn about finance, not being on the audit committee. So with that, I'm going to let you talk, and then I'd like to hear from council too.
From a staff perspective?
Yes.
There's no significant value that the committee provides the staff. There is the selection of the auditor I think we do that every 5 years to make sure to rotate that. So there's some work done there, but That's every 5 years.
Does that help staff with them, with the selection of the auditor?
Fair point. That's a selection we can make on our own internally. So the hours that you see out there would be the direct savings if that committee was not, didn't exist. So if it provides value to the council, happy to do it, but there's not a net benefit to the staff.
So then that's my next question is, does this council feel like they're getting value from that?
And I would just say, when it comes to selecting an auditor, as you know, there's a list of auditors who are qualified to do these types of audits. It's not just go find an accountant out there. These folks are qualified and certified to do these types of audits. And it's an independent audit. We don't have any say on what their findings are. They come in independently as they're supposed to. It's by law. Every city goes through this every year. So we did have an issue here a few years ago where the audit committee was, and it's because that's sort of what the trend had become, that they were tasking the audit committee with additional audits. And those were costing money. And when we found out about that, we said, well, that's not appropriate. The council is the only one. They can advise the council if they feel like, but that wasn't what was taking place. And so we did put an end to that if they want to make a recommendation to the council to add additional audit requirements or do additional audits, the council can decide if they want to pay extra money for that, because those things do cost extra money. So.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at a couple of, because I had the audit committee for 7 years. And the two concerns I have, is the ACFR. Well, I used to know it by a different acronym. Anyway, do we get any input from the audit committee on that? We did with specific people in the past, those that were qualified to look, and you can tell who they are if you have a financial background to start with. Okay. The other one is the selection of the auditor. Okay. I'm going to use something that Stefan said earlier. The perception that the finance department is selecting the auditor is who's guarding the hen house, I'm not sure that really have an appearance of independence. One of the suggestions that I had thought about was having an ad hoc committee for auditor selection or interviews. Now that, I'm going to dovetail into something else too, and that's, they're called advisory committees to the council, okay? When was the last time we had an advisory presentation? That's a rhetorical question, but I don't recall one. I recall year-end accomplishments and year-end goals. Should the council take an active part in selection, or not selection, but vetting the auditors? I'm throwing these out as just alternatives, but I certainly don't like the accounting department, if you will, selecting the auditors. Because we're sitting here on the dais, we're going to have to approve the contract for sure. Okay, based on what? And I'm not making an accusation here whatsoever. I mean, I think the record, how many excellence awards have you got? What have we done? 20 years in a row or something?
33 years, I think, now.
Okay, so we've got an excellence there, but it's also the perspective and perception from the outside that I concern myself with. So there's all different alternatives here, I think, from my perspective.
May I just share something with that perspective? And I do agree. And again, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. I've been doing this for 25 years. This is the only city that's had an audit committee that selects the auditor. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of cities that do that. I think that it's a very common practice that you operate without an audit committee, that the city council is ultimately the one that selects the auditor. It goes through
Correct.
staff and there's a selection, but you approve those contracts. Regardless of who does it, whether it's the staff that does it or whether it's an audit committee that does it or whatever, you all make that final selection. And
I'm going to
and do
ask
that.
you this. How many audited firms are presented to the city council?
No, I don't have any idea. You do an RFP or whatever, and we'll bring the one that is selected. That's generally how
Who's
it
doing the
works.
selection?
Again, that's most, the cities that I've been with, it's the staff will sit down and it's based on a couple of things. What's their qualifications? What's the cost of the audit? Oftentimes, we'll take a look at who else are they doing audits for to make sure that they are qualified and that they do a great job. And once that contract is signed, I mean, there are requirements and restrictions in there of who they report to and how they report their information so that it's not motivated by staff members or council members who are trying to hide things. It is an independent audit. And like I said, the groups of folks out there that do these audits, there aren't a lot of them. They're pretty limited because they are very specialized in what they
Okay,
do.
then I'm going to pose this one to you. If there's 3 of them that respond, and they're all 9s in all categories out of 10, what criteria did you use to send one to the city council?
You know, you want to answer to that?
Oh, it's a couple things. It would depend how we set up the scoring criteria in the RFP. And then I think in a case like this, it might also make sense, and I think we often do this, is we bring in people from outside this jurisdiction to be on the evaluation criteria, just to make sure there are some other eyeballs from outside the department. But yeah,
Thank you.
I understand the perception question that you're bringing up, is that it's us making a recommendation of award to you. You're accountable to the award, but we're the ones doing the evaluation. That's real.
Right, okay.
I just want to comment that the staff report brought to us for selecting the audit committee could include all this information so that you can clearly see the process and the criteria.
Well, but I'm just going to go, we're getting one, is my point now.
Yep.
So something, we're talking about changing the way we're doing it. Okay?
Yep.
That's where I'm going with this. Okay. You've got my
Yes.
$1.25 worth.
Okay.
Patrick?
Yeah, I sat on the audit committee and I found it very informative, but kind of addressing 2 questions that Susie, you presented before. One of the questions, and you didn't present it here, is qualifications for the committee in itself. I would, in the long run, kind of agree that you would think that somebody that would apply might have those qualifications, either a CPA or a bookkeeper or something. But I didn't feel that it was necessarily, because some people run their own companies. And when you're looking at government, you're looking at balancing budgets and making sure that the accounting is done. And in return, I think most of the time that they pick the audit, I would gather to take a look at the history of the city, and you'll find that most of them are the same companies that we go to because they do government accounting, so nothing that. One of the other things that you present, but you didn't present it today, that I think is real crucial that we've noticed in the last time of people applying for committees that have not even attended one meeting. So, I mean, to me, whether I was on the Park and Rec or I applied for the Planning Commission, it was kind of understood, at least, that I needed to attend one meeting. And this kind of goes back to when we were interviewing some of the people, they really didn't understand their committees that well. So maybe I would encourage that we continue on the process that unless there's some unforeseen reason, you must attend one meeting.
So you're for an audit committee?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have anything? Yeah. I'll get back to you.
I sit on a ad hoc audit committee for a nonprofit board, and it's a different scope because the auditor was already chosen several years ago. So our committee is more that we want to make sure different members of the board are participating in the audit process. So I would be in favor of having transforming this this audit committee to be ad hoc if there is value there. Given that it sounds like most cities they don't even have one. If this doesn't fulfill a need for us, then I'm also in favor of disbanding it. Because I'm actually not sure, does anyone in the room even know why the audit committee was started in the first place? Was it to fix a problem, then end up creating other problems?
I will say this, oftentimes we establish committees, and I don't know if the audit committee is there, but I think Patrick and Art really alluded to this, that there's a perception. Sometimes you have additional advisory committees because you want to get more of the public involved in certain things. And as you go along, you find out, well, how much interest do you really have? And on some committees, we struggle to be able to fill that committee. We're begging people to please get on there because there's not a lot of interest. The audit committee is one of those that can be difficult to fill. They only meet a few times a year, and even on those few times, as Susie has said, we struggle to get a quorum even for those 2 times a year to do that. So sometimes it is the perception. You have an audit committee so that you can, I guess, show that you've got oversight in that. How much actual oversight are you getting? Frankly, not a lot. The oversight really happens through the independent audit, and all of that stuff is public, and your citizens in your community have all of that information right there. Where the audit report comes out, it's public record. There's nothing hidden there. And so it's all there. I have seen some cities that are going through financial problems. Maybe they had an embezzlement, or they just went through a bankruptcy, that they'll start injecting a lot of things like audit committees and oversight committees into the budget because they've got a bad reputation now. That's certainly not the case here. This city has been very transparent when it comes to its budget, has had successful, good audits, has received awards, and you have a budget with a very healthy reserve as a result of the very prudent and wise management, both from the council as well as staff. So.
Thank you. I am in favor of disbanding it, but I want to leave the door open to, if there's a need that the finance team finds or the council finds, to have it be an ad hoc committee. And of course, continuing to message around the annual audit with our community, maybe some more lay person kinds of messaging as well, so that they understand what even is an audit. Thank you.
Stacey?
Yeah, I think I feel similarly. I think that in looking at these committees, it seems like all of them, but excuse me, the audit committee kind of serve a purpose of one purpose or another. And I think the audit committee doesn't fall into any of those categories. So I think if there's some concern about having some additional eyeballs on choosing an auditor, then I think that's easy enough to either do, add an ad hoc committee of council members to that process, or if we want, we can then maybe go out and find, 2 citizens with accounting background. But my concern with that too is municipal finance is very different than any other, sort of accounting. And so, you could run into a situation where in choosing members of the public, you're causing, again, more work to have to explain all of the differences. So, but yeah, I think in terms of just that, I would say maybe we put a pause on the audit committee for now and look at an ad hoc committee when it comes time to choose an auditor.
And I think that's what Patrick was saying when he talked about, government financing is a different animal than what your, a CPA who has no government finance experience. There are some different rules there that you're dealing with. Gatsby is a different animal altogether, and staying on top of that is a lot of fun.
And then I have some thoughts on the selection, but I don't know if we want to dive into that now.
Well, before selection, if we're going to disband the committee, selection is a moot point. Yeah, exactly. You want to say something?
So I just want to say, do you have your direction that you need?
So yes, in order to disband a committee, we'll need to bring it back to council at a later date with a resolution. So I'll bring that back.
If that's the direction, I think I'm hearing that, but I'd rather hear each council member say that they would like or not like, so we're not misunderstanding.
Yes, I agree, disband, and if we need a
And
subcommittee or.
And I'm okay, but I want to make sure that we have some form of ad hoc committee, and I'm not talking about the makeup yet, for selecting the auditor.
So when we go in every, whatever it is, 5 years, that and I don't know if it's going to be called an ad hoc, because that's more, I think, maybe I'm wrong, that's kind of a council thing, a council ad hoc, but.
Well, as opposed to
just doing
standing.
a interview / selection committee for the new auditor, and you can ask for volunteers for something like that. The committee ends once the selection happens. It's a selection committee.
Ad hoc.
Yeah.
I would support that. I would support that.
You would support that?
Yeah.
I also want to bring up the one thing that I said about, that seems to be interest in learning about public finance. I don't want to get rid of that because I think that's very important for people. So I don't know if that's something that we can possibly add to maybe the Citizens Academy or something.
Yeah, the Citizens Academy does have one day that, well, it's a half of a session that's combined with the administrative stuff. So they do the city manager's office and then they do the finance. And normally the city manager is long-winded and takes up 4 hours and that leaves 10 minutes for finance. But I can take direction and we can swap that around and start with finance and let them do their thing to get into that. But you're right, it's very high level, brief. If we want to get into more detail on government finance, we can certainly do that if there's interest, but.
I sat through the session and it was super helpful. And I think, I felt like it was the right amount of information.
High level's good.
So.
Well, and that's okay, critiquing the Citizens Committee, or civics, whatever it's called. Anyway, yes. By the way, the long-winded part, doesn't happen here, right? Yeah. Okay. So you good on that? On that
I think
committee?
we have direction on that. Yes.
And that's on audit committee, okay? Sustainability. Any comments?
It sounds like that serves a purpose. So I think we need to keep, again, I don't think any of the other committees I would get rid of.
I brought up an issue at the last meeting when they did their year-end report and new goals. And we got a year-end report, and I was questioning the number of people that were on the committee and what they had done, but also individuals who were not on the committee and were prior. And I posed the question at the time, maybe the committee needs to have more people on it. I don't know.
But I think it wasn't so much as prior, it was a year-end report. So because you had people who left the committee mid-year, that report needed to include the accomplishments of everyone who had been on the committee in that calendar year. So I think that's where the confusion was. I don't think that we should extend the committee. I think 7 is fine. It's in line with all the other ones.
I'm going to go to, are you getting some benefit out of the Sustainability Committee? And would you get more if you had, what have you got, 7, 9 people?
Yes.
Or would that be more confusing?
Definitely there is, merit to this committee. It really helps us greatly with our climate action plan. I think it was just last year when we did reduce the number of committee members. I think it from 10 went down to 7, again, because we were having some issues recruiting. So I think it is up to council if you want to.
More is not necessarily better. Just because you're not on a committee doesn't prevent you from attending those committee meetings and participating as you can and getting involved. The recruitment issue is a challenge sometimes, and for every committee. And so expanding the number can be problematic, but this was something that the council tackled here several months ago, I think, when you took a look at it. If you'd like us to relook at it and bring it back, we certainly can, but.
Well, that committee has also got different criteria for membership, isn't it? From the community and from the.
Yes. Yeah, they're different, yes.
You're right.
So, yeah, that could be problematic. I'm just throwing it out that if there's that much interest and there's that much demand for the service, if you will.
I would like to, since we just changed this, I think a few months ago, I'd like to give it some time with 7.
The other issue that came up was term limits. They were having a challenge getting some people, and we had some people that were termed out that probably could have had an opportunity to be back on it in a short time. So that's something maybe we should consider too. So it was a little bit more difficult to fill than we thought when we did things in a categorical way, which made logical sense to have big business, small business. The criteria was there, but we necessarily couldn't fill each criteria with members. That's when they had some shortages.
Okay. Comments?
Just had a comment about the difficulty to fill. I think that's also in the eye of the beholder, because perhaps some of the ways that we're trying to reach the community, it doesn't mean that there isn't interest, right? It's not just interest. This is many people may be involved in community kinds of projects and initiatives, but not see themselves as someone who could be a valuable member of a commission or committee. So I think that's incumbent on us, like all of us, like staff, council especially, given how broad our reach is, to educate people about what it's about. So that's one thing. Another thing around term limits, I know some of the folks you're talking about who they're like perpetual members of the committees, and while I appreciate their dedication and leadership, we also need to get fresh voices, because that can have a chilling effect, even if their motivation is positive, which I think it is. But if you're sitting on a committee for 20 years, I mean, people opt out of even trying because they're like, well, I'm not going to go against that incumbent. So I think we need to have a balance there. Respect those who have, maybe they can graduate into like a alumni program and be part of ad hoc focus groups, and then we make room for fresh voices. And that is change that takes time. It's not going to be overnight because we posted an application.
Okay. Anything else?
So again, I just want to go back to how we select the people on these committees. Are we going to talk about that?
Oh,
or-
select, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on the exactly.
I just, a little bit of concern in terms of, so I'll be honest, I don't like the way we're doing it right now. I think it's very difficult when we are all members of a very small community, and, maybe we have 10 people who apply for a position and there's only 4 seats or 3 seats. 4 of those people are probably really good friends of mine that I encouraged to apply. And now then I have to go and look them and in the eye and say, I'm sorry, I can't choose you for this committee. And I get that's part of the job and part of what I signed up for, but I'm wondering if there's another more maybe, you know, or the opposite, right? I'm going to choose my 3 friends, my, you know, Lions or Rotary buddies or whatever, because I know them and I know what they're capable of, and I know that they'd be fantastic. So I don't know if there's a way around that. I don't know if there's another way to do it. I don't know that an ad hoc committee necessarily would erase that, because you're still potentially saying no to someone. I don't know what the answer is or what the option is, but I'm not a big fan of how we're doing it right now.
I agree with Stacy. I don't like the way that we do it right now. I think it's inefficient. I do like, I lean toward having a subcommittee, and I lean toward that, even though it might be a little more difficult, having the liaison and another council member, so it's not the same 2 council members, because I think a liaison knows their committee a little bit better, at least if they've been on it for a year. So that's what I kind of lean toward. I don't like the way we do it now.
Okay.
I have to look your way more.
And I definitely think that especially with the Youth Advisory Committee, I just tears my heart out to have these kids come up and they're nervous, and then we're asking them questions, and then we have to tell someone no. I just, that
Tell me about it.
is not okay with the Youth Advisory Committee. So I think that if we do decide to keep the process, I would say we need to absolutely do something different with that committee, and either not have us choose and just have, you know, the staff members choose that committee, or
No, please.
take it offline.
No. Yeah, when it's an advisory committee to the council, you may have city managers that think differently, but I'm not comfortable taking away your prerogative to
And
do
that's
these
fair.
interviews and appoint, and giving it to us to give you members.
No, that's fair.
I don't want to do that.
That's fair.
Yeah, I would support an ad hoc committee on that too.
Well, and define it.
That, you know, somebody from the council, and maybe, you know, not necessarily people that are aligned with each other on all issues too. So some a little bit, you know, maybe we do randomly pick somebody, 2 people.
Okay. Phoebe, you have any comment?
I actually have no problem telling friends and people that I respect no, because it's part of life, but I do understand the caveat with the Youth Commission. I think they already choose it offline, the Youth Advisory Committee.
So Parks and Recreation staff interviews the youth members, and then when they come to the council meeting, those are just the members introducing
Okay.
themselves. The only youth members that are being interviewed by the council were the ones that were applying for CSAC.
I see. Okay. And I think that, I'm losing my train of thought here, because it's a lot of different factors we're looking at. But I would be open to an ad hoc committee. I would also be open to streamlining the current process, you know, which is cutting down to 1 question, and making sure we're asking the same question. I make sure I ask the same questions of each applicant. I also have been doing this myself ahead of time. I email all the applicants and welcome them to the process, and I also give them like 3 to 5 questions I could ask, just so they get a sense and feel a little bit of comfort that they're coming in and it's not just like a free-for-all of barrage. But I can only speak for myself, not other council members. Obviously, we don't want this process to be like, again, a chilling effect where it's so hard, arduous, or embarrassing, but we need to be able to recruit and know that, you know, if they're going to be a public face of our advisory committees and commissions, they would need to be able to interview with us and be able to accept whatever the answer is.
Okay, Mike, I'm okay. It depends what you're talking about as far as the ad hoc, you know, who the participants are. I'm diametrically opposed to subcommittees of the city council. And I'm going to give you the example. If Patrick and Phoebe are on the subcommittee and doing the first stage vetting, I, as well as the others, will not hear the questions. I will not hear the answers that are asked, nor the responses to any of the vetting process, any of the dialogue that goes on. So I am relying upon Patrick and Phoebe for what they're, and I'm not trying to use the two of you, just as it by example here, but I have no idea. So I'm totally blind, as are the other two. So I'm not in favor of the subcommittees. We used to have two-person subcommittees, a whole liaison list, did we not, Patrick? Mm-hmm. Okay, we don't have them anymore. Well, for one reason or another, but I'm not supportive of them just because of the communication, and it lends itself, if one of the committee members doesn't vet this person because I don't like them, and I'm going to move this one forward because it's one of the ones I recommended, again, is that the right way to do it? So it breeds all kinds of problems as far as I'm concerned. And then when Stacy talking about, depends on who's on, when you're talking about, you got to face this young kid who's talked to you and he doesn't even make the first cut, is tough to swallow. But I'd sure hate to add bias into the decision-making process.
So would maybe then a compromise be pulling this offline and not doing it during a special council meeting?
Yeah,
Where
it
it's a little
has,
more informal?
if it's the full council or a quorum, it's public.
Right.
And so it's not a private, in the conference room kind of a thing. If you do an ad hoc subcommittee, what you're doing is possibly having the liaison for that committee plus one other council member, and you all would decide who. So it's not the same two that do all the committees. Each committee would have a different ad hoc subcommittee doing the interviews. If you do a special meeting, it's still televised, it's public, and your deliberation has to be public. So it's still going to be public. Somebody's going to, they can sit in and record, it's going to be recorded, has to be recorded now. It's there, they're going to listen to the deliberation, they're going to listen to what you're saying and who you want, and you're going to publicly vote for and select that person. You can do it in a special meeting. The special meeting ensures that it's not taking up time during a regular council meeting, it's just adding a meeting. And you can do that, at the EOC and still make it public, so that it's not sitting right here, or you do it here. Regardless, if it's a quorum of the council, it's a public meeting. If it's an ad hoc subcommittee, you don't have, it's not public. You bring them in, you can do it wherever you want to do it. It's not open to the public. And you're making a recommendation to the city council when you come back. These are our recommended candidates, and the council votes on that still. And I understand the concerns both ways, that you're just accepting the recommendation or rejecting the recommendation that these folks are giving. You don't get to hear all the questions or what went on behind closed doors.
Let me, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so with that, the way you described it, then the ad hoc committee, the council as an outside body can't influence that ad hoc committee, right? They have to let them make their decision, then bring it before us, and then we can question it or make that final decision. Would that help you feel better?
And you're correct. The ad hoc committee cannot get input from the rest of the council members privately, because that's a Brown Act violation.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, because I kind of thought that Art's, your interpretation was, if the ad hoc committee makes that decision and brings it forward, it doesn't mean we have to go along with it.
But you missed the important point from my perspective, okay? I have not heard your questions. I have not heard their responses, nor have I heard their presentation.
No, I heard you.
Okay, those are the things, and yet, those are the things I'm going to make a decision upon. And I don't think that's fair to the other three. Particularly, in particular, the candidate.
I would agree, but if they're all, Councilman Venkat, if they're all asked the same questions, even the process that we're doing now, we ask the same questions, and they're not more than 2 or 3 questions.
No, we ask different questions.
Well, we're supposed to ask relatively, keep it in the same.
You ask different questions. I don't. I ask the same question of every candidate, or questions, to get their response and the like. Is there another thing? Is there another way to somewhat qualify candidates on the application?
Yes. Again, my caution from what I've seen, the more you try to qualify, you are also disqualifying. And when it's difficult to get applicants sometimes, if you say, well, we've got a more specific questionnaire and it's got 2 or 3 questions or 5 questions, oftentimes you're going to scare folks away from wanting to volunteer to do this. That is a possibility of happening. And so we can add more restrictions or qualifiers on it, but just remember that when you're adding qualifiers, those are also disqualifiers, and you may be discouraging people from applying.
We just did that. We disbanded the audit committee.
Well, that's what you're dealing with. Generally, this is and by the way, if you take a look at what are the qualifications to run for city council, who oversees all of this stuff, nobody tells you that, well, you can only apply if you've attended at least one city council meeting, although I understand and really see the logic in that question. But as a city council member, those aren't qualifiers. But of course, you're also trying to get the votes of the people.
Whoever said that electeds are qualified for the position they get elected to? Okay.
Mayor Kiesel, I understand your concern, and I'm not arguing with that point. I think what we could do is, I always make evaluations on people based on a rubric, right, with different facets: leadership skills, communication. Do they have a growth mindset? Are they comfortable with ambiguity? Are they comfortable disagreeing agreeably? Those are the kind of things that when I've run interview cross-functional teams, because I've hired dozens of people and interviewed probably hundreds, I have to be able to trust that when I'm not the final decision maker, or when I am the final decision maker, that we have that transparent to others. So if we're able to, ahead of time, sit down as a council and say, these are the questions we're going to ask to mine for their leadership skills, their growth mindset, and we're going to stick to these, and we're going to also document their answers, would that be something that would make you feel more comfortable?
But that's Phoebe.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, in 10 years from now, there's going to be another different 5 people here.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm not
can't be that
arguing
unique.
that with your qualifications.
They could change the rules too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They could change it too.
So,
This is only temporary.
yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and that you're creating some objectivity into the decision-making process, and I got that.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not denying that that's what you do, but I don't know that that's what happens. I don't see it, I can't see it, I can't make a
We
comment
can't guarantee
on
it, that's right, because I think each of us, as humans, hold inherent bias.
There you go.
Right? So no matter how strong the rubrics are, we may have bias we don't even know about.
If anything, I would go with the 5 council members and have special meeting, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. But, and I said this earlier, with the advisory committees, advisory committee to the city council. And yet, I just listened to Derek talk about what he's using and what benefit he gets from the Park and Rec Committee. I just heard what Sophia was just talking about, what benefit she gets from the CSAC Committee. where is the city council involved with the advisory committees? Other than we get accomplishes report and goals for next year. I think the city council needs to be more involved with the advisory committees than they are.
So my suggestion would be then, it sounds like from what I'm hearing, we need to leave the process as is for now, because it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of consensus. But maybe pulling it offline, putting it in the EOC, it's a little more of a less intimidating environment. I would be more comfortable with that. I think that as much as we can, we need to submit our questions beforehand so that our, the people have the questions. I liked the, Madam Clerk, if we can go back to that one where you had the changing the question. I actually liked the question that you came up with. The please state how your relevant skills, experience, collaborative mindset make you a qualified member. I like that better than just reasons and objectives, right? It feels a little more focused. So I would prefer to use that question instead. And then I think to your point, when it's time to hear the year-end report or whatever it is, there needs to be a time frame where then we can respond and say, this is what we would like to see this year from you, if anything, right? And so maybe either after the selection process where we have a new committee, we could have the committee come up for just a few minutes, say, these are our goals for the year. How does this align with what council is thinking? And then we can give our input, right? And then the liaison, hopefully then will take that input from council and use that as they interact with the committee throughout the year.
Sounds good to me.
So in the interest of time, this is the council's time. Lunch is back there ready for you. We can continue the discussion and let it free flow. The staff certainly is looking for some direction. If you're prepared to give some direction on the selection process, we're prepared to receive it, or we can continue the discussion after lunch. Again, it's public. You can talk about whatever you want during lunch. I'm going to look to the city attorney to make sure that that's the case while we're back here. We're not being recorded at that point, so.
We're not on Zoom, so I would suggest.
Okay, so no real discussion about that. It'll be a different issue. Again, laws have changed, so. So we can continue the discussion after lunch if you'd like, or you can give us some direction now, whatever you want to do. I'm hearing things shifting. What I heard was there were 3 or 4 that were good with a ad hoc sub, Art is against. Now I'm hearing that shift. Am I hearing accurately or am I not hearing accurately?
I think you're hearing accurately.
Okay.
I understand where Art is coming from. So in that case, I agree with Stacy, special meeting, and I like these changes on this option 4. Perhaps the questions different on the application, and maybe we limit council to submitting 1 question beforehand so we know what that is.
I agree with those.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
You're not going to abstain?
No.
Okay. So we have some direction now on this. The other portion of what we've prepared would be talking about the policy, or the policy for proclamations. We can hit that out right after lunch, if that's okay. Yeah. And I know there's some discussion here that Art had talked about with reports and advisory committees, and are they advising? We can simply put together some comments on the responsibility of advisory committees and how often they should be coming back to the council.
That to me is like a work in progress, because I don't have a good solid process.
Yeah.
I mean, so just the fact that we're going to work on it would work for me.
All right.
If that's okay with the rest of the council.
Mr. Mayor, are we going to be talking about the rest of the committees too? Because we still have some other committees.
Say that again?
The rest of the
committees.
As far as whether to disband or keep or anything,
Right.
I think I heard the only one you wanted to disband was audit, and that was the direction that we got. And then it sounded like, based on afterwards, you discussed a little bit about the other committees. I thought I heard that we were okay with the others, and then we got into the selection process.
Well, I didn't get to discuss one committee meeting that I wanted to discuss, so.
It's your meeting,
It's
so
your
we're
meeting.
here.
Well, no,
Okay,
yeah, I'm not trying to
Yeah,
cut you
no,
off.
I had some concerns. I was gratefully appointed to the traffic committee. But before I got on the traffic committee, I did my little research to see the benefit of the traffic committee, and I look at it, and I appreciate the report. We have 5 staff members on it. We've got 100 hours in on it. The year before I got appointed, they only had 2 meetings. So far, what my observation has been on the meetings, that we do get a little bit of public input, but that the traffic committee has reports from the Park and Rec talking about management, but it doesn't seem to be focused on traffic. My concern is, should it be an ad hoc committee? We've got 100 years, I've got 5 staff sitting here. Generally speaking, the traffic committees are not more than 20 to 30 minutes. I don't, the exact time. So I have a question, is that a useful time of staff when what we're really getting is staff reporting information that already came from the Park and Rec, already was on management? So I had some concern that maybe that should be an ad hoc committee. And some of the my constituents, or people that watch it, they're saying, this is not about traffic. We're not talking about traffic. So we're sitting with all these wonderful staff heads sitting there, but I don't know what we're really accomplishing.
I would defer to Andrew. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think just to start, this past year has been pretty busy on the Traffic Review Committee. The committee serves as the, the oversight committee of sorts for the Bike and Ped Master Plan, and we know that's been very active. We regularly report out and get input. From the committee itself, the committee is staffed by Public Works staff, by CBD, and the police department. So these are all good perspectives to have when we review the Bike and Committee presentations and drafts that come before the TRC. Also, I found it very helpful from a perspective of having unique traffic challenges and getting those perspectives from the other departments and the community member as well. Typically, when there's something a little more on the challenging side, when there's a see-click-fix request of some sort for painting curbs that may lose parking space, for example, that's certainly something that we bring to the committee and get those perspectives on. Is that something we want to move forward with from a PD approach, or from Public Works, or other folks that contribute to that?
And the
Andrew?
only thing I would add to that is this is also the only avenue for our residents to bring specific traffic-related concerns, could be in their neighborhood. So that's vetted through the Traffic Review Committee.
The scheduling of this, and I understand the frustration, a lot of these continually get canceled. For the scheduling purpose, when the council approves the calendar and all of those things, is it a monthly scheduled meeting? Yeah. So it's a monthly scheduled meeting, but the meeting is only held as needed. And so if there are no traffic issues that are coming up, they simply cancel that. And you'll get a lot of canceled meetings because there's just nothing there to review. And they don't hold the Traffic Review Committee with the kind of makeup that you have here unless you actually have something there to go over. So it's approved on the calendar. It's a specific time and day each month. And then if there's nothing on the agenda, similar to the IDEC or even the Planning Commission, if there's nothing on the agenda, they'll cancel that meeting. And so the traffic review is kind of the same way.
Andrew, who monitors, I'm going to use the word generally, and it's for traffic and roads and the such legislation? I'm sure PD does as well, but.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a very good question. That could be something that's through the TRC as well. For example, AB 413. That was the painting of the red.
Oh, my favorite, the red curves?
That was
Yeah.
certainly something that came to light and something that we shared through TRC, and it was something that we needed to implement. So that kind of legislation does come through us, and we review it, and we implement it as needed.
You're going to see more of this in the Safe Streets discussion that's towards the end of the day today as well, but I'm sorry, Marlene, go ahead.
And we get, some of the legislation gets flagged by CPPG as well, as it relates. Not
Oh,
only-
yeah, I got that, yeah.
And then what I do is I would share, Kevin, on behalf of City Manager's Office, would share all the important or pieces of legislation that we are tracking with the department heads. So that's another source.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I know, Andrew, you just started here, so the good batting record is, we've had 2 meetings, so that's fabulous. I'm just looking at the prior thing, we only met twice out of 12 things, so I had some concerns, so.
Sure, and
Thank
I
you.
probably can't use that excuse anymore.
Yeah.
Is there a statutory requirement for
As much
that?
as I'd like to.
Is there a law for a statutory requirement for that, a traffic review committee?
I don't believe so, but it is established in our code, in our municipal code.
Okay. Did you have some, I'm sorry, Phoebe. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Kiesel. Yeah, for the traffic committee, I wonder, and maybe this is not something we can decide today because it wasn't on the agenda, but expanding the scope of the name, because when you hear traffic review committee, it's very concentrated to traffic, when it's really about the infrastructure, the streets, the sidewalks. So if there's an opportunity to rebrand that in the future, and I know that there's going to be an ad hoc or has been an ad hoc committee already with the bicycle and pedestrian ad hoc committee that's part of the traffic review committee?
That is part of the traffic review committee.
Okay.
Kind of we're the review committee for the bike and ped master plan.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because if you recall, I sat in the bicycle pedestrian thing, and the chair came in and did the presentation that we saw in that, after the last meeting.
Okay. Anything else? We're good? We're going to take a recess for lunch, if that's permissible by legal. Can we, under the Brown Act, we can have lunch, can't we?
Yeah, no, we did that device.
Yes.
Sorry, Marlene, I left all my stuff here.
We were all wondering.
Nobody stole it. I'll grab one from my office.
No problem.
Who was it from first? See that? Did you see?
Yeah. Careful. Trip hazards everywhere.